Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be yet another great late night conversation. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are going to have yet another late night chat, and I'm looking forward to it. We have some important issues to discuss, so it's going to be great. So let's roll.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. So absolutely glad to be here. And we've got plenty to talk about as the night is young. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. The way we do things on this channel, for those of you who may not be familiar, is I give my opening remarks, whatever it is I'm going to talk about for tonight. I give those opening remarks. Those opening remarks are then followed by a roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who is on the other side of the camera. And then from there, after that, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So that's how we do it. So if you've got something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, all you need to do is send me a Rumble rant, send me a Rockfin, or I guess we're not on Rockfin, send me a Rumble rant or send me a super chat here on YouTube. Should be a good stream tonight. We have a very, very important topic to discuss. Second half of the show is all me answering your questions. So send me some questions to answer. It should be great. Now, folks, before we go any further, I do want to remind you all that the Center for Political Innovation, CPI, that is the organization behind all of this. We are doing great stuff. We have great conferences. We're doing great outreach, trying to build a real peace movement here in the United States. We just had a great event with Los Angeles Family Church out in LA. And we are marching ahead. And if you want to join an organization of patriotic Americans who love their country and want to stop World War III, I would urge you to join the Center for Political Innovation. Our dues are only $10 a month. We have Zoom calls every Saturday. And in addition to the Zoom calls that we have every Saturday, we also have study meetings. We have local meetups, and we organize rallies and conferences. We publish books. We're doing great outreach at this point. We need people to join our organization. We have 160 members from around the country, and we would like to expand our membership. We are a growing organization. We're doing great work. We were just at the World Youth Festival, where we got appointed by the Russian government to lead the American delegation. We actually got to talk to the Russian president at the World Youth Festival. Two of our members, including myself and a guy named Noah, we both got to speak to the Russian president. So many great things have happened with CPI, and many, many more are going to happen. So if you want to join a real movement to build peace in the United States, join the Center for Political Innovation. Now, another quick announcement. I was just out in Los Angeles for an amazing event that we just did, an absolutely amazing event for peace on the Korean Peninsula. It was really, really an amazing event, a North-South Korea symposium I did with Los Angeles Family Church. And it looks like I'm headed back out to Los Angeles for Peace Cup 2024. The Peace Cup is a United Nations soccer tournament dedicated to peace. This year, it is dedicated to the peaceful reunification of North and South Korea. And they're doing it with LA Galaxy soccer team in Los Angeles, June 28th through the 30th. And it looks like I'm headed back out to Los Angeles, and we may be having a stream dedicated to the Peace Cup. It's going to be really, really awesome. So if you're in the LA area and you are available that weekend, come out to the Peace Cup 2024 in Los Angeles, because the goal is to have Peace Cup 2025 in Pyongyang. That is the goal, right? Obviously, a lot of things are in question to make that happen. So, yeah, we got the Peace Cup coming up. Looks like I'll be back out in Los Angeles for Peace Cup 2024. So, keep that in mind. Now, at this point, I do want to remind you all the way these streams work is I give my opening remarks. My opening remarks are followed by a roll call, and then I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if you got something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, all I need you to do is send a super chat here on YouTube or send a Rumble rant on the Rumble. Get me talking. That is what we'd like to do in the second half of our show. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's do it. I'm going to jump into my opening remarks. Friends, there was a very, very important press conference in Washington, D.C. today featuring our good friend of the Center for Political Innovation, Scott Ritter. And this press conference featuring Scott Ritter was devoted to the very, very serious situation that we are in right now. And it is not getting any attention. No one is talking about the fact that we could be in a nuclear war very, very soon. The crisis taking place at this moment is not a joke. It is not a joke at all. And this is a very, very serious situation. And it's being ignored. And it's being ignored by everybody practically. And so the Schiller Institute hosted Scott Ritter and Richard Black, two high-ranking former U.S. military people. Scott Ritter is a good friend of the Center for Political Innovation. He's spoken at a number of our conferences. And at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., they had an event where they talked about the danger of nuclear war. Right now, Russia and Belarus are conducting joint tactical nuclear drills, and I'm going to show you some of what Scott Ritter said at the very, very important press conference that took place in Washington, D.C. So I'm just going to pull up some of the video, and I'm going to give you some commentary. I'm going to show you a lot of things, but yeah, we'll just pull up some of the video here. So we'll just skip ahead to where Scott was speaking. Here's what Scott said.
Destruction. Nuclear deterrence. And this worked up until the end of the Soviet Union. It worked so well, I have to say, one of my first adult jobs was as a Marine Corps officer implementing arms control treaties in the former Soviet Union, part of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, where we got rid of entire categories of nuclear weapons. The first time that we didn't just limit the growth, we actually reduced the arsenals. And this could have led to even greater cuts in the nuclear arsenals. But no, not for the United States. When the Soviet Union went away, we decided that we needed to maintain a nuclear advantage over the Soviets, and we corrupted the concept of arms control. We withdrew from arms control treaties like the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which gave mutually assured destruction its teeth. See, without ballistic missile defense, the missiles will hit their target, which means that if you go to war, your missiles will hit the target they're aimed at, the missiles aimed at you will hit the target. Under George W. Bush, we decided we didn't want any missiles to hit America. Ostensibly a rational thought, except at the same time we were seeking to gain nuclear supremacy over the Russians so that our missiles would hit Russia. This creates an imbalance. And after 9/11, we went further. We saw a transition of nuclear deterrence doctrine into nuclear warfighting doctrine, where we embraced a doctrine that said that we could use nuclear weapons preemptively against a non-nuclear threat. Our current president of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, Joe Biden, campaigned on a promise to return America to the sanity of sole use doctrine, meaning the sole purpose of America's nuclear arsenal would be to deter others from attacking us. He didn't do it. Why? I attended a reunion of intermediate nuclear forces inspectors, negotiators a couple years ago, and we asked that question to a senior Biden administration arms control official. The answer, the interagency isn't ready for this yet. Now, I live in a nation that is ostensibly the greatest democracy in the world. I know that I go to vote. I know I look at the names on the ballot. I never saw interagency on the ballot. I don't know what the hell they're talking about when it comes to democracy.
Can you believe this? During the Bush era, George W. Bush changed U.S. law to say that the USA could use nuclear weapons in a situation in which they were not facing any nuclear threat. And Joe Biden said that he was going to change that. And then he didn't. And now Scott Ritter, he's saying that when he asked Biden administration officials about it, they said the interagency isn't ready for that, meaning the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, the deep state has decided that what the American people voted for regarding the use of nuclear weapons is not on the table. When you talk about a shadow government and who really has the power in the United States, Scott Ritter is laying it out on the table right there. The interagency, the deep state, the intelligence apparatus, they run America, not the elected government. That should be blatantly obvious at this point, right? Biden won the election on a platform of saying that he would get rid of this doctrine that we could use nuclear weapons in a situation that doesn't present a threat in terms of nuclear power. He got rid of that, nuclear weapons. And that now the Bush doctrine that the USA has the right to use nuclear weapons under any circumstances remains because the CIA and the Pentagon and the deep state decided that that's what the situation is. I mean, that's nuts. If you can't see that that's nuts, you're not paying attention, right? We have a insane, fanatical deep state that is determined to get us into global wars and confrontations. It's crazy. So I just wanted to get that out there.
The president is the commander-in-chief. He is the executive. If he wants a policy direction, he directs it to happen. And the interagency needs to salute smartly and seek to implement it. But we're being told that the interagency isn't ready. That means the establishment isn't ready. That means the establishment seeks something else. And that, of course, is American nuclear supremacy. We live in a world where other nations will no longer tolerate this. Russia is one of them. And Russia today is a nation that is at the pointy end of the American nuclear spear. They're seeing the United States promulgate policies that have American military capabilities thrust up to the very borders of Russia, indeed crossing over into the borders of Russia, threatening Russia's strategic nuclear enterprise, early warning radars, command and control facilities, even nuclear weapons depots and nuclear launch systems. We have facilitated, we being the United States, an attack against Ingalls Air Base where Russian strategic nuclear bombers are stationed. Under Russian doctrine, this alone justifies a nuclear response. We've been tickling the Russian nuclear bear for a long time, and only through the patience and wisdom of the Russian leadership have we avoided a nuclear war. As an American, I take umbrage at that. I don't want to be at the mercy of any foreign leader. I would rather that the American leadership take a rational step towards deconfliction, that I be at the mercy of a government that I get to hold accountable at the polls. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, a constitution that begins with we the people of the United States of America. And that's the final thought I want to put out there. We have a duty and responsibility as citizens to wake up and recognize the threats that face us collectively as a nation, as a people. And the greatest threat to the continued survival of the United States of America today is American nuclear policy, American nuclear weapons. These weapons do not protect us, ladies and gentlemen. These weapons are literally a loaded gun at our head with an insane man's finger on the trigger. We need to come together. We need to stop this. We have an election in November, and let us all do our job as citizens and vote for somebody who places the survival of America above all else, which means they place nuclear nonproliferation, nuclear disarmament, and arms control above all else. Thank you very much.
Now, some people might interpret that as endorsing Trump in the upcoming election, but it should be pointed out, and I'm not saying that it would be wrong to vote for Trump, but it should be pointed out that it's Donald Trump who oversaw the dismantling of nuclear treaties. The INF treaty, a number of nuclear treaties were allowed to expire when Trump was president. And that should be pointed out, right? And in fact, when it comes to allowing treaties to expire, pulling the USA out of nuclear agreements, that was one thing Trump was actually worse than Biden on, right? Is that Trump, he very much was overseeing the USA pulling out of pulling out of nuclear treaties. So I just wanted to mention that, but I'll show you some else of the other things that Scott said during the press conference, because it was just very important. So here we go.
And because you don't understand what nuclear war is, you don't understand the consequences thereof. In the Cold War, we had a plan. It was the Single Integrated Operations Plan. It was the nuclear plan. And when John F. Kennedy was first briefed on it, when he became president, he got sick to his stomach and turned to his advisor and said, "We call ourselves a human race." And he chastised the Pentagon. He said, "You can't ask me to push a button and destroy the world. You have to give me options." So the Pentagon gave him options, which was no matter what he did, he pushed a button and it ended the world. Lyndon Johnson was faced with the same insanity. Every American president during the Cold War understood the consequences of his actions, that if we initiated a nuclear strike, we would all die, he would die, there's no surviving this at all. Then the Cold War ended, and we went into this period where people forgot what nuclear war was. In fact, it was a good thing. I like it that we forgot what nuclear was, because it meant that we were doing things like de-targeting our missiles, so that the missiles in their silos weren't on a hair trigger to be fired off. They had taken the target out of the missiles. In order to use these missiles, you had to make a deliberate decision to retarget them, to rebuild the plan. And this created time for sanity to sink in. And then George W. Bush came along and decided that America's nuclear arsenal had to be a usable nuclear arsenal. But we operated under the notion that we were the supreme nuclear power and that we could intimidate anybody into submission, that nobody had the guts to stand up to us, especially the Russians or the Chinese, because we made it clear that they would be destroyed, that they would die, and we operated on the premise that we wouldn't die. And so it all became a big game of bluff, of bluster, of bullying. Well, the Russians haven't put up with that, neither have the Chinese. Today, Russia has the superior nuclear power. It's the superior nuclear power in the world, with a modernized nuclear force that can destroy every target in the United States, any place in the world that it wants to. Fortunately, it's tied to a doctrine that has some sort of sanity built into it. You talked about, Colonel Black, somebody saying we need to become more aggressive with our nuclear doctrine. What it means is we need to become more aggressive with our bluff. Somebody might not be afraid of America if they know all we have is Minuteman III or Tridents with city-killing capability. But my God, if we make the W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapon and we put it on a Trident missile in a Ohio-class submarine, we now have the capability to launch a small nuclear war. And then we can escalate to de-escalate. How do we prove to the Russians that we can beat them if they don't think we're going to fire our missile? By firing a missile with a nuclear warhead that just goes boom instead of boom. And we think that the Russians would go, oh gosh, thanks for nuking us, we're done. But what we honestly believe is that now the Russians think that because we have this usable nuclear weapon, that we may in fact use it. So to prevent us from using it, Russia will alter its patterns of behavior But Russia won't alter its patterns of behavior when it comes to issues of existential survival. The United States, we talk about backing ourselves into a corner. In this case, the United States is advancing ourselves into a corner of no return. We are creating a nuclear doctrine backed by capacity, backed by doctrine, backed by aggressive leadership that doesn't understand the consequences of their actions. We will go to nuclear war and we will meet our nuclear demise not because somebody intended for this to happen, but because it was an accident. They said they will never call our bluff. They will never react in a way because, oh, they just nuked us. It's all over. And that's the future of this world, ladies and gentlemen, unless we find a way to reverse course. And the first thing, and I agree with Colonel Wilkerson on this so much, sir, we have to find a way to make the American people afraid again. That's a horrible thing to say, but if the American people don't do what you and I did when I was a kid, I grew up in Germany next to a nuclear weapons storage facility. And when my dad went into the bunker, which meant that we might be going to war, that meant the world was going to end. And I grew up as a child fearful. I would go to school in the morning not knowing whether or not I would come home at night or there would be a world. That's no childhood for anybody. But it made me scared to death of nuclear weapons, which made the joy I felt when I participated in getting rid of nuclear weapons as a weapons inspector that much more. We need to recapture that joy, Colonel, but we have to do it by making Americans afraid again.
Yeah, now, what he's saying there, take note of what he's saying. Tactical nukes are actually more dangerous than conventional nuclear weapons because they are more likely to be used, right? With conventional nuclear weapons, a nuclear exchange means the end of the world. However, with tactical nukes, someone's more likely to use one. And you can get a nuclear escalation that leads to a full-on nuclear exchange very quickly. This is an interesting point that he made. He also made the point, and this is interesting, this is about the duck and cover drills. That you know, we think of those duck and cover drills as being propaganda. We think of them as being stupid. But with those drills, Americans were made aware that nuclear war was a possibility. And it probably motivated a lot of Americans to demand their government be in favor of peace and de-escalate. Whereas now, right, we have already crossed Russia's red lines, right? Russia has a nuclear doctrine that says under blank, blank, blank circumstances, we have the right to use nuclear weapons. The USA has already crossed that, right? The USA has enabled Ukraine to attack on Russian soil. The USA has enabled Ukraine to attack nuclear facilities and nuclear defense facilities in Russia. At this point, according to Russia's own rules, they can nuke us, right? They can nuke Ukraine at the very least. People do not realize that the USA is advancing rapidly. We're not getting backed into a corner. We are advancing into a corner where Russia is going to have to make clear, guys, you know, if you keep this, you know, we're going to have to show you that we can actually use our nuclear weapons, right? I mean, you know, when you have facilities and systems set in place to protect you from a nuclear strike, right? And some country is attacking those facilities. At that point, you're entering red line territory. And there should be way more outrage about this. Now let's continue to show what Scott had to say, right? Because Scott, no one says it like Scott. I mean, this guy was a nuclear inspector. This guy was an arms inspector in Russia. He helped, you know, deactivate and de-escalate the Cold War, dismantle the Russian nuclear arsenal after the fall of the Soviet Union. He was a whistleblower in Iraq and revealed what was going on with the lies about weapons of mass destruction. Scott Ritter is a great American hero, but let's talk about, let's let him finish. He's got plenty more to say.
The United States and NATO employ what we call today intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets over Ukraine and around Ukraine. These drone attacks, I don't believe, could have penetrated Russian air defenses without access to real-time intelligence about where these air defenses are deployed, what the radar envelopes are, what the terrain features are, how you can use terrain masking, timing of attack, the specific route of attack. It's a very sophisticated plot that is beyond the capability of Ukraine to do on its own volition. So I agree with the Colonel that the United States was directly involved in the targeting of this. Now the question is, why would the United States do this?
Yeah, let's be clear about this. All right. The narrative that you've been given of the Ukraine war, the idea that the Ukraine war is independent Ukraine fighting against Russia, fighting for its sovereignty against Russia, is just complete bullshit. Ukraine is just an outpost of Western imperialism. It is a U.S. military base. The whole country has just been transformed into an American and British proxy at this point, right? And we just need to acknowledge that. The Ukrainian people voted for Zelensky because Zelensky ran on a platform of peace with Russia. He was going to implement the Minsk agreement, bring the country back together, bring the eastern regions that declared independence back into Ukraine. And then he got elected, Zelensky, and he found out that, oh, he's not really the president. The Ukrainian military, that is all directed by American advisors and funded with American weapons. The Ukrainian military really runs the country, and the Ukrainian military is trained by the American military. It's armed by the American military. Ukraine is not a sovereign country. Okay, let me just repeat that. Ukraine is not a sovereign country. Ukraine is an outpost of Western imperialism. In 2014, the Ukrainian elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was neutral between Russia and the European Union, was ousted in a violent coup. And ever since then, Ukraine has basically been transformed into an anti-Russia fighting force. That anti-Russian fighting force was first unleashed against the people of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, the people who declared independence. And, you know, the people in the eastern regions who very much feel close to the Soviet Union and very much love the Soviet heritage of Ukraine, they declared independence. They declared that they did not want to be part of the U.S.-backed, fanatically anti-Russian government that was installed in Ukraine after the 2014 destabilization events. And so as a result of that, because they declared independence, the U.S.-backed regime, armed with American weapons, started bombing its own people, who it considered to be its own people. And it started bombing Donetsk, and it started bombing Lugansk. And for 8 years straight, they were bombing the people of these eastern regions. Now, people don't know about this. People have it in their heads Ukraine was peaceful until the special military operation from Russia began. No, that is not the case, right? The United States has been enabling the Ukrainian government to bomb and attack and unleash killing against the people of the eastern regions for 8 years. And I have shown this picture. I just wish everyone could see this picture. They have taken down the Wikipedia page of this. This is a monument that exists. This is the monument. It's processing. You know, here it is, right? This is a monument. This is in the new republics. These are all the children who've been killed. 15,000 ethnically Russian children. Killed. 15,000 ethnically Russian people. They've been bombing Donetsk, bombing Lugansk for 8 years straight. They signed a peace treaty, the Minsk Accords, that was supposed to stop this, and they didn't implement it. And then they elected a president. They had an election in Ukraine, and they elected Zelensky, and Zelensky was supposed to implement it. He ran on a platform of implementing it. And he realized, oh, I'm not really the president. Ukraine is not a sovereign country. Ukraine is just a proxy fighting force of U.S. imperialism, of the United States and Britain. That's all Ukraine is. It is not a sovereign country. And it has been bombing, and for 8 years straight, the Ukrainian government was bombing the people of Donetsk, bombing the people of Lugansk, killing them. And finally, Russia moved in to protect them. It had no choice. And this is a monument that was created to all the children that were killed that CNN never bothered to tell you about, right? So let's get this straight. right? And the fact that these recent drone attacks that were carried out by the Ukrainian government very obviously were done with U.S. support. Ukraine is being given missiles and weapons and all kinds, billions of American taxpayer money to just keep this war going. This is not about Ukrainian people and their freedom. This is about the United States trying to weaken Russia and wage a proxy war with Russia on their border. That is what's going on. So continue, Scott.
And I come back to one of my built-in assumptions is that we think the Russians are bluffing. We believe that if we can put enough pressure on Russia, that we will cause the Russians to quickly seek the negotiating table to bring an end to this conflict. A lot of what we have been doing against the Russians, using the Ukrainians as proxies, is timed to something that's scheduled to take place, I think next week, the Swiss, peace conference. But the purpose of the Swiss peace conference isn't to seek peace, it's to create a global coalition who can put political pressure on Russia. And so there's a sequencing of trying to build this global coalition to put pressure on Russia and putting Russia in a state where it will respond to that pressure.
Yes. How can you have a peace conference for Ukraine and not invite Russia? Right? There's a war going on, and the two parties involved in the war, the two countries involved are Russia and Ukraine. So how in the world can you have a peace conference with only one of those countries there? It is not a peace conference. It's a sham. And China has called it out for what it is. It's a sham, right? A real peace conference would involve both of the countries that are fighting in the war. Very basic stuff, right? This is just an effort to build consensus for some kind of resolution of the conflict that will be unacceptable to Russia, to build a case against Russia and unify different countries against Russia. And that is all this conference is. It is not a peace conference. What's going on in Switzerland now is not a peace conference. They are not drawing up serious proposals. They are not trying to bring Russia to the table and reach a real resolution. It is not a peace conference. And do not be fooled. Do not be fooled by this.
So these attacks that have been made against Russia's critical infrastructure, attacks made against Russian civilian targets, are all designed to wear down the resolve of the Russian government so they would respond to this pressure. This is lunacy in the extreme. Russia has a nuclear posture which clearly states that when its critical nuclear infrastructure is placed under threat, to include nuclear threat or conventional threat, that this warrants a threat of existential nature that can legitimately give Russia the green light to use their nuclear weapons in response. Russians aren't bluffing. They don't bluff. The Russians are highly responsible. They have a very mature posture and very mature leadership. Vladimir Putin's been in power for 25 years. You get to know the lay of the land during that time. He is comfortable with where Russia is. He is comfortable with who Russia is. And he is comfortable with Russia's place in the world. He is not going to throw away a quarter of a century's work on a whim, on an urge, on miscalculation. But at the end of the day, when he is confronted with an existential threat, he will respond in accordance with Russian doctrine. And that means nuclear weapons. This is a gross miscalculation on the part of the Ukrainians, on the part of the United States, and on the part of all the allies that we have tried to bring together to put this pressure on Russia. We don't understand Russia, which is why I believe the best thing we can do as Americans is to begin talking to the Russians, begin listening to the Russians, begin learning about the Russians so that we better understand who they are, what they want, and we can make responsible policies based upon that.
Yes, Scott is really on point here, but just for those of you who may be joining, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I will be answering people's questions in the second half of the show. So if you got something you want me to answer in the second half of the show, send a super chat or send a Rumble rant on the Rumble, and I'll be answering people's questions. But this press conference today was really, really important. I want to show you some other highlights from when Scott made some good points. So here we go.
Shown an inability to gear up for this kind of large scale war because there's a political cost to be played. And as we saw recently in Europe with the recent European elections, there is a political price to pay for bad policy. And some European political parties have paid a heavy price.
Yeah, I just want to talk about this. I really want to talk about this because there was a sweep in the European Parliament elections for the new right, right? And these are nationalistic parties, conservative parties. There was a sweep for them. And when I listen to leftists and socialists and communists, and I say this as someone who considers myself to be a communist. I'm a Christian, I'm a patriotic American, but I am a communist. And I've studied Marxism, Leninism, and I've written books about communism and been to a number of international communist gatherings. I am definitely a communist. If there's anyone who's qualified to speak about communism, it's me. And I listen to leftists, socialists, and communists talk about the recent sweep, and they're all like, fascism is rising, fascism's right. I'm like, guys, what's going on right now and what happened in Europe is because the people of the EU countries do not want a war with Russia because it'll be happening possibly on their territory. Hopefully not, but there's already a huge proxy war with Russia happening in Ukraine. And the people of the EU countries do not want a war. And the so-called left has completely dropped the ball on this issue. Almost all of the communist parties in Western Europe are taking anti-Russian positions. The French Communist Party, which is a huge political party that has seats in the parliaments, their position is atrocious. And the same for the Greek Communist Party, one of the biggest communist parties in the Western world. Atrocious. And the left has signed on with bullshit cancel culture. They've replaced the red flag and the hammer and sickle with the rainbow flag. And they're more concerned with check your pronouns and check your privilege than they are with ending the wars and opposing imperialism and fighting for justice for the working class. The left has completely dropped the ball. And this press conference that's happening today, where the hell is the Answer Coalition? Where the hell is the United National Anti-War Committee? Where the hell are United for Peace and Justice? Right? Where's the peace movement? Right? Scott Ritter, he's great. He's speaking, right? And he's hosted by the LaRouche movement, the Libertarian Party. But where is the peace movement? Where is the peace movement? We're about to have a nuclear war, and the peace movement has taken a vacation. They're saying free Palestine. Well, that's important. I'm not denigrating that. I'm pro-Palestine. I've been covering those rallies, right? They're busy canceling you, Caleb. Exactly. Canceling anybody who does the real work. Scott Ritter and others, they tried to have a rally, Rage Against the War Machine, and instead of supporting it, the Answer Coalition called it a Nazi rally and tried to get it outlawed, right? If you don't see at this point that all the communist groups, they used to say they were controlled by the KGB. Well, the KGB has been replaced by the FBI and the CIA. And if you can't see that all the communist groups at this point, most of the communist groups, the few exceptions, Party of Communists USA, the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, and around the developing world, many of the communist parties are still legitimate. But the bulk of communist organizations in the United States are completely controlled by the American government. Right? The Communist Party USA ran an article on its website saying that Russia is a bigger threat to world peace than NATO. They ran a pro-NATO article on their website. You can't make this up, right? I mean, it's if you can't see this, that the whole point of Marxism, Leninism, the whole point of being a communist is you're supposed to oppose American imperialism. You're supposed to oppose capitalism in its monopolistic stage, imperialism. You're supposed to build a united front against the imperialists and their wars of aggression, right? And the CPI, our manual, our second manual, our second textbook, we even put the quote from Mao in the front of the book. We even put it in the front of the book. I'll show you. Right? I will show you the epigraph that we put in the book. Right? I mean, it's really obvious, right? But the whole point of being a communist, right? Unite all the forces that can be united and build a broad, united front against monopoly capital and against the imperialist policies of war and aggression. That has been completely abandoned. That has been completely abandoned by these people. They are more interested in building a cancel culture campaign of smears and harassment and lies against anyone who speaks in favor of peace. So you want to look at the election, the sweep of conservative victories that just happened in the European Union countries. You know, you can point fingers all day, but when you point a finger, there's three fingers pointing right back at yourself. The Communist Party USA, the French Communist Party, the Greek Communist Party, they did this. The people of Europe want peace, and the communists are working with the governments to promote war. And if that's not obvious at this point, right? I mean, it should be blatantly obvious, right? The communist groups have completely failed. There was a time where the communist groups opposed the wars. There was a time where the communist groups sympathized with the governments around the world that American imperialism was attacking. There was a time where the communist groups opposed the FBI and opposed FBI repression against black revolutionaries. And those days are over. Let me repeat that. There was a time where communist groups opposed war. There was a time when communist groups opposed the attacks on and sympathized with countries around the world that are under attack by American imperialism. And there was a time when the communist groups opposed FBI repression. Right now, the Uhuru movement, a black communist organization, the African People's Socialist Party, the People's Democratic Uhuru movement, is facing 15 years in prison, and they are not accused of any crime. They are accused of speaking in support of Russia. And all the communist groups have done nothing for them. Tucker Carlson has done more to support the Uhuru movement than the Communist Party has. The Communist Party put a bland statement on their website, and all their members are going around saying, well, it's a cult, and I think they support Trump. They're bad people. Tucker Carlson, a right-wing conservative, has done more to support the People's Democratic Uhuru movement than the Communist Party. And Party for Socialism and Liberation went as far as trying to get Uhuru's March on Washington canceled. And they called them out. It was unbelievable, right? If you mention the Uhuru movement, this group of black activists that could go to jail for 15 years for exercising their right of free speech, if you mention them to any of these fuckheads that you will find at the New York City People's Forum, the pink-haired, trans-obsessed freaks, if you mention the Uhuru movement to any of them, they'll go, I heard that's a cult. I heard that's a cult. I heard that one of their leaders says something transphobic sometime, and that's fuck the left. All right? I hate to be obscene here. Fuck the left. Right? So all these socialists that are mad about how the right-wing parties are rising, are mad about how Trump is going to win in the fall, you got no one to blame but yourself, because all the things that communists and socialists used to stand for, you guys have abandoned. You guys are the party of shut up and support Joe Biden, silence any dissidents, of blindly support lockdowns, blindly support demonization of countries, cancel culture, LGBT obsession, and you have turned your backs on Russia. You have turned your backs on People's Korea. You've turned your backs on China, and you've turned your backs on black revolutionaries like the Uhuru movement. And so people that are against the low-wage police state and against the war are supporting the right wing. And nobody did that. No one is more responsible for it than the left themselves. So fuck the left. And you know, I mean, I have no loyalty to the left whatsoever. Thank you. Fuck the left. And I'm going to have more to say about that later. We're going to let Scott continue.
Macron has paid a heavy price for bad policy. And the idea of going on a war footing where you haven't adequately explained the necessity of conflict to your people is bad policy. So neither the United States nor Europe is in a position to confront Russia in a sustained high-intensity fashion. That's the good news. The bad news is we still have a policy that's very aggressive against Russia, which means that the default in lieu of adequate conventional capacity is nuclear posture. So rather than making us safer, this actually makes the world a much more dangerous place to live, because we aren't altering our policies to meet conventional realities, conventional capabilities. We are insisting on moving forward aggressively on policies that can only be backed up by nuclear weapons, which makes the likelihood of these weapons being used that much higher.
Okay, well, we're going to come back here to...
All right. So I after the press conference was over, I went on RT as an expert. Usually I go on as a correspondent, but they had me on as an expert contributor, which is like a different kind of a changing of roles. I used my bookshelf. I didn't have, you know, my screen behind me. And, you know, they had me on this afternoon as an expert contributor to do a long segment about this press conference that just happened. So I am going to put on my RT segment from this afternoon. You will see what I told the millions of people in Africa and Asia and around the world who watch RT. You will see what I had to say about the press conference.
Well, let's discuss this further with RT's correspondent, Caleb Maupin, who followed the whole conference. I mean, Caleb, it was clearly a conference where people spoke very passionately, but also something that struck out for me, and I only listened to excerpts, to be fair, was that there was definitely a sense of urgency. Why do you think that was?
Well, we had Scott Ritter speaking as a former arms inspector. And one of the points that he made was that, you know, in the United States, we might talk about people being backed into a corner. But he made the point that at this point, it seems like the United States is marching into a corner. They're trying to get closer and closer to a situation where Russia feels that it has no choice and there will be some kind of nuclear confrontation. And this is absolutely disastrous. Now, another point that was raised in the meeting was the fact that there doesn't seem to be awareness about this among the U.S. public. This should be the front page news story on every channel in Western mainstream media, but no one's talking about how serious of a situation this is and how dire the results of the current circumstances could be. You know, we heard Richard Black talk about how part of the cause of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine is the fact that if Ukraine were to join NATO, the USA could use it to host nuclear weapons that could threaten Russia, and that there is just not a realistic assessment of the situation and how dangerous it really is going on in the mainstream press. And I think that's why you heard so much passion today.
I mean, one thing that also was definitely touched upon, and it seemed that the panelists were in agreement, was about, quote, making people afraid. Can you just break down what was it exactly that they were referring to there?
Well, the people speaking were all older folks who could remember the Cold War, and they described how during the Cold War, school children in the United States would practice going down to the basement of their school, or they'd practice, putting their heads under their desks. And people remember that as being traumatizing. People remember that as being, scary, fear-mongering. But at the same time, there was an awareness among the general public about what the very serious consequences of a nuclear confrontation would be. And now it seems the American public is clueless. And as our leaders in the West are marching us closer to a military confrontation with Russia that could escalate into a nuclear confrontation, Russia is a major nuclear power, there doesn't seem to be any awareness around the public about what that would really mean. And so while we look back at the Cold War years and the civil defense drills and we kind of laugh at them, that awareness that those drills created has been lost, and there doesn't seem to be a motivation on the part of the public to stand up to U.S. leaders and say, stop this. Let's not march into a corner and march us into a situation where some kind of tactical or even full-on nuclear arsenal would be used.
But it wasn't all just sort of US and Russia based, right? I think at some point they were also discussing the recent European elections, which I think for some was a shock, for others, given the way that the people have been feeling, was probably a long time coming. What were the key points that they had on that?
Well, it seemed like the recent elections, in the analysis we heard from the various speakers, they were a slap in the face to the establishment that seems to unanimously go along with the idea of prolonging the conflict in Ukraine and escalating tensions with Russia at all costs. And it's almost comparable to the silent majority that Richard Nixon spoke of, that there is a silent majority in Europe that does not approve of the status quo, that does not want a confrontation taking place in their backyard, and does not want the economic and potential humanitarian consequences of this interaction and this escalation. And I think that was made clear by all the speakers, that overwhelmingly the European public doesn't agree with having a full-on confrontation with Russia to please the elites of Britain and the United States. And that opinion doesn't seem to be well represented on Western media channels and in Western media discourse, but it is there beneath the surface.
I mean, we also heard, I think, at one point, Scott Ritter. I mean, he's obviously been a huge promoter of dialogue and of peace. He's calling for a massive peace march in September. I mean, I suppose the question is can this make a difference? Because a lot of people, and it's the same with voting, right? Someone says, oh, well, it's just one vote. It won't change anything. But of course, if 1 million people think that way, then obviously it can be a landslide change.
Sure, and that was a point that Scott Ritter made. He talked about when he worked as a nuclear arms inspector, how the Reagan administration that he worked for was impacted by the very big anti-nuclear rallies that took place. And he's committed to having a major peace rally in Kingston, New York on September 28th to stop the march toward World War III and have the public vote not just with the ballot, but also with their feet against the policies of the American government that are escalating the danger of an all-out nuclear confrontation. And he also said that voters need to keep this in mind when they go to the polls, because who you vote for does make a difference. And right now, Joe Biden seems committed to escalating tensions with Russia, pushing Russia and pushing Russia and pushing Russia. One point that Scott made is that, in his time working in Russia and in his recent travels, he says, in America, there's a lot of bluster. We love to, talk big and wave our arms. Russia, it's not like that. When Russia says something, they say what they mean what they said. And that it should be taken very, very seriously, the drills that are going on and the situation now with Russia. This is a very serious situation, and it could have very, very serious results. And Scott Ritter is very, very concerned. He came and he was speaking at the National Press Club at this conference put on by the Schiller Institute in the aftermath of not being allowed to travel to Russia. He was getting on a plane to come to the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, and Then three Customs and Borders Enforcement agents came on and confiscated his U.S. passport. They did not give him any explanation, and he still to this day has no idea why his U.S. passport was revoked by the State Department and he was blocked from traveling, right? There's been Supreme Court rulings on the freedom to travel, but he was planning to come to this very important gathering, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and they stopped him. And that shows how there are powerful forces that are very threatened by Scott's message. As somebody who has been an arms inspector, who knows what goes on behind the scenes, he is raising the alarm about the danger to world peace and the danger of nuclear confrontation. And some people don't want his voice to be heard, and they also don't want to see a connection between the American people and the Russian people.
Oh, also, on the nuclear question, there's one thing I do want to get your take on, because the panelists were talking about how smaller tactical nukes actually pose a greater danger of nuclear confrontation than bigger ones. What's the logic there?
Well, that's interesting, because you would think that smaller nuclear weapons would pose less of a threat. But the reality is that with bigger nuclear weapons, right, if major atomic weapons, hydrogen bombs, if those kind of things are going off, that's the end of the world as we know it. But tactical nuclear weapons are much more likely to be used because the explosion they make is smaller. And if one side sets off a tactical nuclear weapon, then the other side sets off a tactical nuclear weapon, and then bigger nuclear weapons get involved, and you can escalate much more quickly to a confrontation. During the Cold War, they spoke about mass assured destruction, and we only had major nuclear weapons. But with the dawn of tactical nuclear weapons, that creates a situation where you can have an escalating nuclear confrontation much more quickly. So, yeah, that was my analysis of the press conference that Scott Ritter gave. They had me on RT to talk about it. But I want to talk about a couple more things. I see that we got a super chat already. Gleb wants me to tell some college stories. That's great. If you have any more super chats, send them in. Rumble Rants on Rumble, super chats on YouTube. That's what the second half of the show is me answering people's super chats. But I want to talk about Scott Ritter, because I told you all about Rage Against the War Machine and how amazing that anti-war rally was. It was a very, very important anti-war rally. You had leftists like Dennis Kucinich and Chris Hedges. You had conservatives like Judge Napolitano, and it was a broad array of forces. And I have never seen so much opposition to an anti-war rally. I mean, in the lead up to that rally, they went all out to try and cancel that rally. And I am so proud that CPI was a sponsor of that rally. And I am so proud that we were able to host Scott Ritter. So one of the main ways they attacked the Rage Against the War Machine rally was they attacked the fact that Scott Ritter was going to be speaking because he has this criminal conviction. And they were vicious, and they ran articles, and they did everything. And all kinds of people, big name libertarians like, Dave Smith and Spike Cohen, all these big name people. Oh, I can't be there if Scott Ritter is going to be there. So Scott Ritter backed out of the march. And all of these big name social media grifters, they still didn't go to the rally, because it wasn't really about that. It was just about trying to prevent the rally. It was about trying to create negative attention for the rally. That's all it was about. It wasn't really about Scott. But Scott backed out, right? He said, look, if they're going to make a big thing out of me and it's going to hurt the rally, I'll just not go. So Scott was unfairly pushed out of the rally. And you'll notice that all the people that complained about Scott being there, they still didn't go to the rally. Why? Because this is what internet grifters do, right? This is what complainers and naysayers do. It wasn't really about Scott being there. It was just about talking on the internet, right? And you'll notice that even though Scott didn't speak at the rally, they still, every time you mention the rally, the cancel culture crowd goes, oh, Scott Ritter was there. He was convicted, And so you'll notice they didn't get any gain because Scott wasn't there. Well, Scott was unable to attend the rally. But we at CPI, we sponsored the rally. We were official sponsors. We sponsored it with thousands of dollars of dues money. As an organization, we decided that this anti-war rally was so important. We put up thousands of dollars as sponsors of the rally. And Angela McCurdle of the Libertarian Party, she was tweeting at me just today. She really appreciated that, right? And I was just at the Libertarian Party convention. glowing reception. Again, all the people who really want to stop the war love CPI, and all the people that are, dumb fuckheads don't want to stop, don't like us. But all the people who really want to stop the war, they may be libertarians who really disagree with us, they may be Republicans. All the people that really want to stop the war love CPI and the work that we do, because we're actually trying to stop the war. But regardless, so Scott was unable to speak at the actual rally. We sponsored the rally with thousands of dollars, and then we decided that we had to do something to honor Scott. So we had a reception for Scott Ritter at a hotel afterwards, and we had an after party, and this after party was very, very well attended, right? There were 160 people. Some people say it was as many as 200 people. I know, like, the Ron Paul Institute director was in the audience. I know that some of the most prominent libertarians were there. It was very, very well attended. And this was what the room in Washington, D.C. was like when Scott Ritter took to the stage, right? And this was the epic moment in Washington, D.C. This is why CPI is important. Some people think that all CPI does is go out in the middle of the woods. Well, they are very wrong, right? There's a lot of people smearing us right now, but this is what happened. Ideas are great, but the reason that the Center for Political Innovation exists is to put on events like this, to give a platform to ideas we don't widely hear in the United States, to educate people about anti-imperialism and socialism. And that is why it is really an honor tonight to bring forward our guest of honor, a real hero, someone who deserves to be heard from the heavens. Everyone should hear what this man has to say. Scott Ritter is here. Scott Ritter is here. We are proud that Scott Ritter is here. This is a hero. This is a hero right here. We love you, Scott. We love you. Go ahead and give us some words. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. To be honest, I thought I was just coming here to a reception to say hi to people, and speaking is, hopefully it's a bonus. Listening, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, Caleb. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, and I want to thank everybody here for coming out. I know some people traveled a long way to come to this rally, and great journeys begin one step at a time, and we're on a great journey, and today was the first step. And the people that didn't come here, they're one step behind us. Mm-hmm. And when you take the next step, they're 2 steps behind us. So you guys are the winners, and they got issues, and I applaud you. So again, thanks for coming out. Now, they say some of the best journeys, you bring about some of the most interesting travel companions. And I have to say right now, listening to your talk and everything, you guys are some interesting traveling companions. Yeah, because I couldn't think of any more interesting traveling companions than you for somebody like me. When I grew up, my father was a career Air Force officer.
Anyway, you can watch the speech. It's all over YouTube. But yeah, we hosted Scott Ritter, right? Because we saw that a very important anti-war voice was being smeared. The conviction of Scott Ritter is total bullshit, by the way. Just total bullshit. It's complete bullshit. And just complete bullshit. Look into the details. I'm not going to go over them on here, but just look into the details. Complete and total bullshit. But what Scott said there about how, the best journeys come with traveling companions, right? Hey, I was just out in Los Angeles, and I spoke at Los Angeles Family Church, the Unification Church, the followers of Hak Jahan Moon, Mother Moon, the widow of the Reverend Sun Young Moon. They invited me out there to give a talk about North Korea because they support peace on the Korean Peninsula. And what's interesting is the rally the press conference that just happened today with Scott, and the speech that I gave at LA Family Church over the weekend oddly line up because this was, in my speech, I spoke about why North Korea has nuclear weapons. So I'm going to show you the section from my speech called Why Does DPRK or North Korea Have Nukes? And this is from the speech I gave over the weekend in Los Angeles at Los Angeles Family Church.
important to understand why North Korea has nuclear weapons, because generally the version of events that we're given about why North Korea has nuclear weapons is that, well, Kim Jong-un is crazy and he wants to murder us all, and so he's got nuclear weapons so he can threaten to murder us all. Well, that's malarkey. That's not the case. So, first of all, let's talk about the fact that in South Korea, there are, at this point, I want to get the number right, yes, there are 28,500 U.S. troops. Now, how would we feel if in Mexico there were thousands of troops from a country that we consider to be hostile or an enemy in the United States? Let's say there were 28,500 Russian troops in Mexico. Let's say that there were 28,500 Chinese troops in Mexico. How would we feel about that? But it's not just that those U.S. troops are there. Every year they do this war game, this provocative drill. And what the provocative drill is those 28,500 troops and all the airplanes and tanks and missiles and helicopters and jets, they march them all right up to the line. And they say, well, it's only a drill. Don't worry, guys. It's just a drill, just a practice. And they do this every year. Now, can you imagine if, in Mexico there were 28,500 foreign troops, and every year they marched all of them right up to the border to practice invading the United States. And they said, don't worry, guys. It's just a drill. It's just a drill. Well, we'd be wondering, which year is it not going to be a drill? That's what we'd be wondering about. It's a little bit of a provocation. That was one good thing that Donald Trump did, is he suspended those drills. They paused while he was president of the United States, and that's one thing I give Donald Trump a huge amount of credit for. I think it's an applause. There's more to it than that. In the 1990s, I told you North Korea was in a very, very bad place. They, had a food crisis in the country. They felt that they were possibly going to use the moment where they were suffering so much. The United States would use that moment to just go in and crush them. So they announced that they were going to get nuclear weapons. And the Clinton administration didn't want North Korea to get nuclear weapons, so they made a deal with North Korea. They said, if you don't get nuclear weapons, if you sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, if you stay in it, we will give you a huge amount of heating gas, because it's very cold winters in North Korea. We'll give you a huge amount of food aid, because you're having a food crisis. We will help you get peaceful nuclear energy. In fact, we'll send some technicians from the United States to help you build peaceful nuclear energy power plants, and we'll make sure that you have what you need, and in exchange for that, North Korea said, okay. And they paused their plans to get nuclear weapons. And they got some food, and they got some heating gas, but then the U.S. Congress cut off the funds for the deal. And so North Korea waited. And the U.S. Congress continued to not fund the deal. And then Bill Clinton was out of office, and George W. Bush was in office, and they waited, and the food wasn't coming, and the gas wasn't coming, and the peaceful nuclear energy power plants weren't being built. And then we all remember George W. Bush. 9/11 happened. And then George W. Bush got up in front of the country after 9/11, and he said, there's an axis of evil. There's an axis of evil in the world. And who did he name? He named Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. And at that point, North Korea said, oh, okay, I guess we're not getting what we were promised in exchange for not getting nuclear weapons, so we'll get nuclear weapons. And that's why North Korea has nuclear weapons.
Yeah, again, we're talking about nuclear issues. That's why North Korea got nuclear weapons. And if you want to watch the entire meeting, it's here on this YouTube channel. It's the latest video. It wasn't live. It was just the latest video. You can watch it. But I also, it was a great event. It was a really, really great event. It was packed, by the way. By the end, there was almost 100 people in the room. It was held in like the cafeteria of their church, and it was packed and beautifully laid out, and just such amazing hospitality. But it began with some spirited singing. So I want to put the spirited singing on, how we began the event. And then from there, I think we'll do our roll call, and then I'll start answering your questions. So if folks have anything else they want me to talk about, by all means, send your super chats for the second half. See, there's a couple that have come in already. But yeah, I'm going to put on the singing, how we began the meeting, how we began the event with some singing. From there, I guess we will, at that point, we will we will answer people's super chat questions. So yeah, we began the event with some spirited singing. This was our singing at LA Family Church.
Korean refugee herself, and so I'm sure we can all feel her heart through the lyrics. So if you can all rise, make something new, we can all sing together. The song is called Who Nights Easter One. English or Korean? English. It's gonna be easier. A little bit easier.
So that was how our great event out in Los Angeles began. You can watch the video here on this channel. All right, folks, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are now going to have our roll call. So names and locations, I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, Who is with us here tonight? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Who's with us? Who's with us? Who's with us? All right. Klaus Kinski in Germany. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Names Crooklyn in Brooklyn. Zach Brunch in Virginia. In Richmond. Jamie in Boise, Idaho. St. David's, Bermuda. Orlando, Florida. Ottawa in Canada. Nate in Chicago. Hillary in Wales. Georgia C in California. Chicago, Viceroy, Patrick in Maine, Alex in Brazil, Mani in India, South Africa, Patch in Arizona, Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland, Ohio, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, South Africa, Master Jack, Seneca, South Carolina, Mohsin from Iran, April and Chris in Salt Lake City, Balthazar in Oakland. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. We got Tomas from Malaysia. We got Steve from Algeria. North Carolina, Adingo. We got Austin, Texas, Umbrella Man. Seasoned Noob in China. Anthony from Detroit. Welcome, Anthony. Good to have you with us. We got Ray in California. Welcome, Ray. We got John McCarthy out in Chicago. Longtime peace activist John McCarthy. Ireland. We got Ireland. We got Mosin from Denver. We got Today in California. Welcome, welcome, Today. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us here tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us here tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Moonlight Beach, California. Scott. Welcome, Scott S. from Moonlight Beach, California. Al Kider. Al, Sydney, Australia. We got Dan Niswander. I was on his show. He interviewed me. Dan did an interview with me when I was out in LA. He was in that crowd you just saw. It was a great event. Really great to talk to you. Dan is a rock and roll musician. He gave me one of his albums, by the way. Dan is a very cool guy. Steve in Singapore. Very, very good. Welcome, Steve. Welcome, Steve. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else with us here tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. We'll jump right into our question and answer session. If you got it, we'll jump right into it. But yeah, anybody else wants to give their names and locations? If not, we will jump right into it. So I see that we've got a Rumble rant that has come in. I see that we've got a few super chats that have come in. So I am going to take this opportunity to point out to you all that sending a super chat is not only a way to give me something to talk about in the second half of the show, it's also a way to support this work. I live in New York City and I have this extra room. I have a 2-bedroom apartment rather than a 1-bedroom apartment so that I can have a room to stream with you all. And I am streaming a lot, right? I mean, tomorrow I'm getting up early, and early in the morning I'm recording yet another podcast with Jyoti Brar and her father, Harpal Brar. That's going to be awesome. That's happening tomorrow morning, and that'll be up on here. And I stream and make videos more than anybody. So I do need your support. Super chats help me pay my rent, pay my bills. They support the work that I do. And there are other ways. Oh, we got Alex Rickel out in Portland. Shout out to Alex. There are other things, Steve in Singapore. There are other things that you can do to support our work. For example, you can buy some of our books, right? We got our new huge textbook, Out of the Movement to the Masses, Anti-Imperialist Organizing in America. We've got the book, our small book, right? For those of you who like smaller books, we've got Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For? Alex Rickel from Portland is in the process of making an audio book of this book. So I'm looking forward to that. And new updates also. So if you go to my personal website or you go to the CPI website, on both of them, we now have the audiobooks that Tyler made of 2 of the books, right? So if you go on the CPI website to Where Is America Going, you can it links to the audiobook that Tyler McConnell, a great member of our community, made of Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution, right? So you can go click and it'll take you to the audiobook. We now have the audiobook available, right? And if you go to the page of We Are City Builders, hold on, We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual, it also will take you right to the audiobook that Tyler made of it. So as soon as Alex Rickel is done with his audiobook, we'll put that under the Houthi book. We now have audiobooks of the CPI books. It's amazing. It is really, really exciting. The ideas that we are spreading here, optimistic, patriotic socialism, it's about building people up and not tearing people down, about bringing people together to mobilize, to build and construct a rationally planned economy, to raise the level of productivity and wealth for all. That is what we are all about here. And so because we are all about that, we've got audiobooks, we are doing outreach campaigns. We are very excited. The Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. So I see a couple more super chats have come in. Greatly appreciated. Super chats support the work we do. Buying the books or joining on the Patreon supports the work that we do. If you donate to CPI, that money goes to CPI. I don't have access to those funds. There was some innuendo at some time that was really stupid. And so because of that, we made sure that it's all separate. And so if you want to support the work that I do, buy my books or send a super chat, get me talking. There are some good super chats that have come in so far. So I'm very excited. And, the night is young. I can keep going till well after midnight. Can't stay up too late because I do have to get up in the morning to record with Jyoti and Harpal. Harpal is in India and Jyoti is in Britain. And so I'm here in the United States. So I'll be up early to record, but that'll be a great way to start the day tomorrow. So I'm very excited. I do more streaming than anybody. We are building an anti-imperialist community. It is awesome what we are doing. And I am so pumped and excited. I had a great trip to LA. That was a powerful, powerful press conference that Scott Ritter gave today. I'm so honored to know Scott Ritter, a hardworking anti-imperialist peace activist. And so we are marching ahead. Thank you, Crooklyn. Thank you for your super chat. And so I am going to start answering people's super chats. The first one's a Rumble rant. It's from Chow Chow Kathy. And she says, no questions, but have to run. Thank you for all the information. Well, thank you, Chow Chow Kathy. I do appreciate it. And, like I said, super chats are what make this show happen. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to show the super chats on the screen because StreamYard is acting weird and I would have to scroll up for all of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the YouTube page. I'm going to click on fan funding. I'm just going to go through them because there's some really good ones that are out there. The first one, it's from Gleb, and shout out to Gleb. I met Gleb at one of our conferences. Gleb is a good guy, and it was really an honor to meet you, Gleb. And Gleb asks, do you have any interesting college stories? How did professors deal with your unique perspective? Gleb, how long you got, right? I got a lot of them. To be honest, Gleb, I'll tell you a couple of things. First of all, right, I don't think this is anything that shouldn't be obvious, but I'm much more mature now than I was in college, right? When I was in college, I was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And when you're young, you're much more emotional. When you're young, you don't really understand things. So, I look back on some of the ways I interacted with people politically when I was in college. I could have done better, but I didn't know anywhere near what I know now. I didn't have anywhere near the social experience that I have now in dealing with people. And I learned a lot when I was in college. I absolutely learned a lot when I was in college. And it was a time in my life when I was doing intense political activism for the first time. What stands out? Well, it's funny. First of all, I want to mention how much things have changed since when I was in college, right? Because nowadays, colleges are super woke. They are so woke, right? They're just totally woke. And I went to a college, Baldwin Wallace College, which is now Baldwin Wallace University, located in Berea, Ohio, which is a suburb on the west side of Cleveland. And that college was not woke. It was not woke in any conceivable way. And it was like part of academia is you kind of have to be kind of woke, but they weren't. And one example of that is I will never forget this. And this story, I tell it to people and people gasp, right? It is just like, I cannot believe that this happened. All right. But I will tell you about it. My minor was sociology. And so I took sociology, one of my sociology courses. I took it in the summer semester to save time, save credits. And it was taught by a guy from Bangladesh. It was a professor from Bangladesh, a very well-respected professor there, and he was from Bangladesh. And we went over various aspects of sociology, and it was a 2-hour course once a week. It was once a week for 2 hours. We would sit there, and this professor, who was a Bangladeshi guy, he would give a PowerPoint, and I think I got a pretty good grade in the class. The professor liked me, but I tell this story to people, and people are horrified. And I cannot understand to this day how this was allowed to happen, how the man didn't know better than doing this, why the man did not face any repercussions. This would never happen at a college nowadays. But in the section, there was only one African-American student in the class. It was an African-American woman, college-aged, and she was in the class, and she was the only one, right? It was mainly white people. There were a couple Asians in the class, but there was one African-American woman. It's a class of about 40 people. On the section on race, this Bangladeshi professor is going over like a PowerPoint, right? And he's showing income level, and I think it was income level and life expectancy and things like that. And he's showing that black people in America aren't doing too well. So she was the only black person in the class. And he turned to her as he's showing these statistics about racial life. He turns to her in front of this entire class. Keep in mind, she's the only black person in the class, and says to her, "What's wrong with your people?" And I look back on that and I'm like, whoa, holy shit. Like, you want to talk about fucked up thing to say. And I look back on that now and I think about colleges are so woke and all of that. I mean, wow. All right. You want to talk about an inappropriate comment? Just, exactly. Like, what the hell? Like, how could you, and I look back on that and I think, what happened? Like, how was that not an issue? Right. And I look back on that and that was pretty wild. Another thing that I remember from when I was in college was that like, I went to college. I graduated from high school in 2006. So 2006, fall of 2006, when I started college. All over the media at the time, there was a big campaign that colleges were, these far left, anti-American communist indoctrination centers, right? David Horowitz had started his whole campaign. They had just gone after Dr. Ward Churchill at the University of Colorado. So colleges were supposed to be this liberal place. And I went to my college and I'm like, where's all this radical liberalism, right? I didn't see it, right? All right. Where's all this communism and Marxism? I didn't see it, right? And what I thought was weird was, the college was actually quite conservative. It was conservative to the point that I remember, like, I took physics, and the physics professor, he's a physics professor, right? And he's up there talking about the age of the earth. And he gives like a disclaimer before he speaks. And he's like, now, just so you all know, I know not everyone here believes this. I know many people believe that the earth is only 7,000 years old, according to the Bible. And I'm not here to and it's like, I'm in physics class, and the physics professor at a college is having to apologize to the class for the fact that he's going with the scientific consensus on the age of the earth, and he's not teaching biblical creationism. And I mean, this is, this was an accredited, university. And because there were so many evangelical students that were conservative, and thought the earth was only, 7,000 years old or whatever, he's up there in physics class, like, apologizing for the age of the earth that he's giving. I thought that was bizarre. The other thing that I thought was weird, I'm just telling you some other college stories that I thought was weird about my college experience. I'm trying to think what else. I took modern European history. And I remember the woman who taught this class, I think she must have had some kind of weird fetish for diseases and the Nazis, because, it was supposed to be European history from like 1800 to present. We spent so much time learning about Nazi disease experiments. She had slides and graphs and pictures, and she had so many details. And then we learned about, in the 1800s, about, prostitutes and the diseases that they got. Again, slides it was a little bit weird, right? And she's just, slides and images, and I guess, and this woman I swear, I took a class on modern European history, and it was actually a class on genital diseases, and Nazi conspiracy theories about diseases. And it was weird, right? And I swear this woman must have had like some kind of kink where she was like turned on by the idea of diseases on genitals or diseases on body parts or something, because it was like we spent way too much time on, like, when we're talking about the 1800s, and she's like, oh, and in Victorian England, there were prostitutes, and prostitutes often got diseases, and here's what they looked like, and here's the thing that they shoved into the prostitutes to see if they had the disease, and here's a way and it was like, and then we get to World War II, and she's like, and the Nazis were really interested in diseases that affected people's genitals, and so we just watched all these things about sexually transmitted diseases and diseases in genitals and all of this, and it was weird. It was just weird, right? Who likes to look at that kind of thing? It was bizarre, right? I thought that was just downright bizarre. Of all the things that we could talk about in European history, that's what we talked about. I thought that was weird, right? But that's academic freedom, right? Your professor can teach you whatever they want, right? They have the academic freedom. They have the tenure to profess, and that's what she decided to profess, was she wanted to talk about genital diseases and stuff like that. I thought that was very, very, very bizarre. But you want to talk about like arguing with my professors. I got to say this, right? My classmates hated me when I was in college. And the reason they hated me was because most of them didn't give a shit about the material. I was in college. I had this weird delusion that I was going to learn in college. Wrong, right? And I cared about political science, which was my major. I cared about history and sociology and all these other things. And my classmates were very, very annoyed with me, right? And I look back on it. Could I have spoken less? Could I have, yeah, okay. And maybe some of that was my immaturity. But honestly, I take these issues very seriously. I care about the things I talk about on here. And quote unquote normies don't, right? And normies found it very, very annoying that that I cared about, world history and economics and these kinds of topics, right? Normies don't care about these things. One thing that I thought was very, very bad was that the way they tested you in history, in the history section, it wasn't a multiple choice test. It wasn't answering questions with written answers. The way they would test you was they would just give you a name, right? And I remember our history tests were, it would be like a name, Napoleon. And then you would get points based on what you wrote. And that was ridiculous, right? And so they just say at the top of the page, Napoleon. And then you'd write from it, very short, conquered Europe, went into exile on the island of Elba, came back, invaded Russia. Was Corsican by ancestry. I mean, you could write anything about Napoleon. And the professor would grade you based on how close what you wrote was to what they said. Now, that's bullshit. Okay, that's just bullshit. Because what the hell? I mean, it's Napoleon. I could write whatever I wanted about Napoleon, right? We talk about his shoe size. We could talk about, there's all kinds of things you could write about Napoleon. But the idea was they didn't want you to actually be interested in Napoleon. They wanted you to only know about Napoleon what they told you about Napoleon. So if you knew anything about Napoleon, or you cared about Napoleon, or you went and read about Napoleon on your own, they didn't want you to do that. And it was an awful, awful way to grade. And I think look, when I was in college, I remember me and my friends, we used to have an expression. We used to joke about, so-and-so is so dumb they got straight A's. Because it's true. Because the smartest people in college were the dumbest people, right? The people who never had heard of Napoleon before the class, who the only thing they'd ever heard about Napoleon was what the professor said, and they could just write it back, like a robot. They're the ones that got A's. American education is a crime, all right? Don't get me started on this. American education is a fucking crime. All right. And I learned just how much of a fucking crime it was when I went to the United Nations, when I worked at the United Nations. I worked at the United Nations. I was the correspondent for a Middle Eastern TV network, Press TV. Now I'm at Artsy. And I was in the United Nations press corps with people at CBS, at people from the New York Times, people from Fox. And these people had all gone to Harvard and Yale and Stanford and Columbia and Ivy League schools. They'd had the top scores. And these people were dumb as shit. And I would sit there in the UN Correspondents' Lounge and my jaw would drop. How can the smartest people in America, who got straight A's, who got to Harvard, how can they not know anything? But no, that's why they are the highest achieving, because they don't know anything. Because American education is about weeding out anybody who will dare think outside the box, who will dare innovate and come up with new solutions, who will dare have any passion or dedication. It's about, vetting people to get the stupidest, most blind, conforming idiots into places of power, right? They want a bunch of emotionally damaged idiots, right? Kamala Harris, right? I'm sure she probably went to some of the best schools in the country. That's who they're looking for, right? They are looking for unstable, emotional, and very, very stupid people, right? And they don't want people who know anything, right? And American education is actually designed to weed out people with any creativity or intelligence. And little known fact, even in the American system, some of the smartest people in America are high school, college dropouts. I mean, Bill Gates didn't do very well in college, from what I understand. Now, Bill Gates is not a good person. I think Bill Gates is, a Malthusian and all of that, but he certainly was an effective leader on Silicon Valley. But even the education system didn't even really, figure him out, right? And that the American education system, right? If you look at the fact that our presidents, right, Obama was at Harvard and Columbia, and it's like, you look at American education, it is very much, how can we find the stupidest, most easily guided and easily manipulated people and get them where we want them. And what I think is interesting is that it's always been like that to some degree, right? They reward conformity, they reward inability to actually think, and they also reward like lack of interest. The main thing is they want people that don't care, who just want to get a good grade, who don't actually care about the topic or not at all interested. That's what they want. But I think the emotional manipulation part is much more of it than it used to be. And that's what we're seeing, right? It's always been, they said Ivy League apple polishers. Yeah, basically. It's always been like that. But what's weird is, in addition to that, now there's a weird psychological component, right? The way that they push certain things on the campuses. I'm not going to get into too much detail about it, but the way they talk a lot about trauma and the way that they focus on certain things, they also want people who see themselves as victims. They want people that are very, very psychologically unstable. That there's an emotional component to it too, right? It used to be, though, that they didn't want people, right? They did want people who didn't care. They did want people who were disinterested. They did want people that really couldn't care less about the world and just wanted to drink and whatever, but were determined to get ahead and get good grades and didn't care about the subject. That's always been the case. But now they also seem to really prioritize people that are emotionally unwell and damaged. And that was starting when I was in college. We were starting to see that when I was in college, but it wasn't anywhere near what it was now. And also I was at this shitty, school in suburban Cleveland. I wasn't at new school or something like that, but they seem to really now seek out people that view themselves as victims, people that have an emotional, story. I mean, there's actually some interesting TED Talks about this, about how, this is wild, but there's a TED Talk that talks about how the essay that college admissions, counselors go for is always the, oppressed minority essay, right? And that they want that, right? If you want to get into a good school and you are not a white person, you write an essay about how oppressed you are and how you're overcoming oppression. You write an essay about how much you see yourself as a victim, how the world has been so unfair to you, how you overcame adversity. That's what they want. And college admissions counselors know that they want that. And it's very, very odd, right? Because it used to be that they frowned on people who thought like that. They would think, oh, you must be a radical. You must be, but now they really want people at the Ivy League schools who view themselves as victims, right? I mean, I'm telling you, Kamala Harris, my book on Kamala Harris says it all, right? They are cultivating a certain like vengeance, an individualized vengeance mindset. All right. And I mean, it is very, very frightening. And like, go watch the TED Talks about this, about how that essay that they are pushing minority students to write damages minority students, because you don't do well in life. Maybe it's not for me to say, but you don't do well in life if you think of yourself as a victim. And that applies to white men. It applies to anybody, right? If you go around thinking I've been screwed, I've been not treated well, you're not going to get good things from the world, right? You don't gain by interacting with the world in that negative way, right? It's obviously, if you've suffered, it's okay to acknowledge that you've suffered. It's okay to care for yourself and deal with the trauma that you've had and all of that. And it's good when society recognizes things that weren't previously recognized and learns from things that have been done and doesn't do them. But there's very, very much this big effort to get minority students, right, to see themselves, and they reward students for seeing themselves as damaged. John McCarthy has it right. It's hard to find anyone under the system who isn't damaged, but it's very, very, very it's very, very, very weird what they're doing now on the schools. Because when I went to school, it was weird, but it wasn't as weird as it is now, right? And there's some weird psychology going on in academia. I'll just tell you that much. The other thing that's interesting is they are really pushing hallucinogens now, right? Microdosing on hallucinogenic drugs, right? They are pushing that like crazy, right? Used to be college students were rebels, they broke the rules and they used drugs, but now like the counselors at the college, you go to the admission, the counseling center. You say, I'm feeling depressed. I just had a bad breakup. And the admissions counsel will be like, oh, well, have you considered microdosing on acid? Yeah, that's what you need, right? That's what college kids need, right? If he's already not doing well, he's already got some emotional problems, give him some hallucinogens. That'll make it better, right? Get his brain all scrambled so he sees things that aren't there. That'll help. I mean, this is nuts. What they are doing on the campuses right now is some demented social engineering. It was not that bad when I was there. When I was there, people drank a lot, people partied, but, it wasn't anything like what it is now. I'll just tell you that. I'll just tell you that. And they are, the deep state, academia has always been a, kind of a liberal enclave. It has been, for that Jimmy Carter degrowth, all the professors, their research is getting funded by grants from the Rockefeller think tanks and et cetera. They're getting funded by, by various, it's that, it's the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the foundations that fund the research are that degrowth Eastern establishment, right? They've always had the upper hand on the campuses, no question about it. But it's taken off to a bizarre level at this point. It is really taken off to a bizarre level. And the amount of like group therapy, let's talk about our trauma. That was one thing that even when I was in college, I found I was like, the weekend where you go and learn about college, the orientation weekend and all that seemed so infantilizing. I was like, I'm an adult, right? I'm 18. I want to be grown up. I want to not be a child anymore. And so much of the college experience was acting like a child, right? The amount of like, games that you might do at summer camp when you're 10 that we were doing, the amount of like, let's sing a song together and clap in a circle, and the amount of like kindergarten stuff that went on. I look back on that and I'm like, what in the world was that? I remember my mentor in college, who was a librarian, he said the same thing. He said, when I was in school, it was like, here's your books, here's your dorm, start studying, you're fine. But now there's all these like getting to know you games. And if you hear me clap once, and if you hear me clap twice, and it's like very infantilizing, right? I mean, it's very, very infantilizing, the college experience is now. You know, and why? What is that about? Well, part of that is about disempowering you, right? Because when you're a child, you have no power. You're reliant on your parents, right? And that's part of it, right? Is getting people to think that they don't have any power, to kind of just, you know, look up to the authority and say, wow, I'm like a child, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. So there you go. There you go. And, you know, I mean, yeah, what is also interesting is even when I was in college, right? And it's not that long ago, right? I'm 36. So it was what, 15 years ago, right? Even then, college was a place you found criticism of U.S. foreign policy. This is the biggest difference. I've been answering this question for a long time, so we'll move on after this question. But, you know, my professors would talk about how the USA had once funded Saddam Hussein. We would read Noam Chomsky books and learn critiques of U.S. foreign policy. You know, even then, you know, college was slightly more critical of U.S. foreign policy than like mainstream media was. It's not like that anymore. Average Americans are more critical of U.S. foreign policy than ever before. Nowadays, college is more pro-war, more pro-Pentagon, more pro-establishment than mainstream America is. And that's a complete flip. You know, I remember, you know, average Americans were like, you know, if you don't like it here, move to another country. You've got to support Bush and support our troops. And then in college, you'd read the Noam Chomsky book and you'd learn about, well, there's two sides to every story, whatever. Not anymore. Not anymore. Now, average Americans are like, why are we wasting all our money on these wars? And the professors are like, we're wasting the money on these wars because Vladimir Putin is a dictator and he's oppressing people. And I don't want to have to give you an F for not understanding that Putin violates human rights. Okay. You know, I mean, it's weird, right? Now colleges are like obsessively pushing U.S. foreign policy, obsessively with the Ukraine flags. And you're a bad person. You know, you're a bad person if you question U.S. foreign policy. And it used to be colleges were more tolerant of dissent about U.S. foreign policy. So that's completely flipped. So there you go. That's the last I'll answer that question. But Gleb, I appreciate you and I appreciate your super chat. And I hope that was a good answer to your question. All right. So now we will move on to the next question. Funky Lollipop says on June 29th, Uhuru is having an event in Miami to drop charges on the Uhuru 3. That sounds very important, right? That sounds very, very important because the Uhuru 3 is probably the most important political case in the United States at this time. There is no case in the United States anywhere near as important. I mentioned that when I spoke in Los Angeles. I mentioned that when I spoke to Russian President Putin. I mentioned that at the United Nations press conference. I have done everything I possibly can to raise from the heavens the Uhuru case. We are planning with CPI, our outreach campaign. We're going to be hanging door knockers about the Uhuru's case around the country. Tucker Carlson has highlighted it. You have no idea how dangerous the Uhuru case is. They are in the process of trying to outlaw anti-war activism. That is what they are trying to do. They are trying to outlaw anti-war activism. I will put on this video. Forgive me if you've seen it before, but I mean, I'll just lay it out there. Peter Coffin made this beautiful video, why the Uhuru case is so important. I will put it on because, you know, we put it together like the Uhuru case is so important, right? It is. People have no idea. So I'll put it on. It's a short video, and then I'll continue with this.
After the rioting was done, U.S. media kind of forgot about those communities. Well, Uhuru, they went out there because they saw black and brown people like themselves that were out there protesting and rioting, and they stayed there. And they've been there since 2014, providing services in the community, giving these young people in the community something constructive to do, not just go out and break shit to raise awareness about the conditions they're in, but ways to actually feed people and serve the community. And they've been there in St. Louis since 2014 doing constructive work. They have really escalated these programs. They have a farmers market. They provide classes and services to pregnant mothers, and in particular in St. Louis, Missouri, and in St. Petersburg, Florida. They're trying to undo the damage that the U.S. Department of Justice and the state police and the local police and all the forces have been doing in communities like Ferguson, Missouri. And at the same time that they've done this community work, the African People's Socialist Party has also taken a firm anti-imperialist stance. They support China. They support Russia. They support Cuba. They support Iran. And when the United States started piling weapons into Kiev, they defended Russia's right to intervene.
This defensive war in Ukraine that Russia is actually waging against world colonial powers, not Ukraine as a single entity, but the U.S. and all colonial powers who have an interest in colonially dominating African people right here in this country and around the world and extracting resources from the majority of peoples on the planet. That system, this current system, is in severe crisis, and they cannot rule in the same old way.
Because of that, their homes were raided. Then months later, the federal government came out with an indictment, and it's charging them with being Russian agents. And it's trying to allege that the election campaign that they ran in St. Petersburg, Florida, was somehow interference in the U.S. electoral process.
4 activists associated with the People's Democratic Uhuru movement and the African People's Socialist Party have been indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice. The indictment from the U.S. Department of Justice accuses them of spreading Russian propaganda and cites simply some web conferences that they had, some Zoom meetings, some emails they sent out, as well as the fact that they have run routine election campaigns. Is this of concern to the Secretary General as an attack on human rights, freedom of assembly, etc.?
I frankly was not aware of the case before you mentioned it. Let me look into it and I will get back to you.
What's going on in Africa is directly connected to what's going on here. What's going on in Ukraine is connected to what's going on in Harlem. You know what I'm saying? It's an international global economy that's all connected.
Because they go to conferences in Russia, this constitutes Russian meddling in the elections. The whole thing is ridiculous. It's completely, utterly ridiculous. They've been running these campaigns for years, since before I was born. Back in the 1970s, they were running people for office. Their platform of reparations, I mean, Marianne Williamson, she's a major Democrat candidate. She also says she believes in reparations. I mean, it's not a unique message that they have in that sense, but they have been targeted because they're doing what you're supposed to do. I mean, you know, at all of our meetings, we have a picture of Fred Hampton up on the stage because Fred Hampton, he built a free breakfast program. He organized what he called a rainbow coalition, uniting low-income people, white, black, brown, Arab, Latino, into one organization, you know, trying to build up community empowerment, trying to do community service projects while teaching Marxism and socialism. You know, we look at Fred Hampton as a great example of the American revolutionary tradition. And, you know, the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, you know, they don't like that we wave the American flag. They don't like that we consider ourselves patriotic. They have their own kind of unique analysis. They talk about what they call the colonial mode of production. That's not traditional Marxist thinking. And we don't agree with them on a number of issues. But it doesn't matter. We support them.
We all have to stand up and oppose the ideology of division and support an ideology of unity based upon our material interests, you know what I'm saying, to work together.
People who can't understand that, people who can't get past, you know, this or that, like, we got to put aside our differences and say that if they come for them, they come for all of us. If they go after them, they got to deal with all of us. That needs to be the attitude among anti-imperialists.
Yeah. So that case, Uhuru, the Uhuru 3, the 3 black revolutionary activists that have been indicted for allegedly being Russian agents. This is the most important case in the country, and we need to raise awareness about this from the heavens, not let them get away with this. So, yeah, there we go. All right. So now, next question. The next question is, Ukraine recently put out another hit list that targets CPI and blames us for the rage against the war machine. And John actually just wrote a great article about that. That's going to be up on the CPI website. I saw that. Ukraine, CPI, we have been targeted and we continue to be targeted. And, it's a badge of honor in a way. I mean, I'm on the Ukraine kill list. I'm considered an information terrorist by the Ukrainian government. But yeah, we recently had a situation where the Ukrainian government, there was another one of these stupid, lists of people that they consider to be bad or whatever was published. And they decided to put CPI on the list. And they blamed us for the Rage Against the War Machine rally, which is, I mean, I appreciate that. I'm moved. I'm honored. But you know, I mean, we were part of that. We had a reception afterwards. We sponsored it, but I mean, you know, the rally, I mean, we aren't like personally directly responsible for it happening. But yeah, it was wild. There's this document put out by the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation, and we got an honorable mention. You know, if you read it, you know, I'll read you what it says. It's great. Yeah, we'll just read you what it says about, you know, what it says about us. Right. Yeah, we got an honorable mention. Hold on. Let me just go down the links. We're on the list, listed entities. And they listed us among all these entities they viewed as being part of the vast, you know, Russian conspiracy. And CPI, not surprisingly, was on that list. And you know, we're honored. We're very, very honored to be on that list. So yeah. But there we go. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to pull it up here. The way the website is set up is not very effective, but it's like texty.org or whatever. And they have this whole thing about, you know, Russian influence and the Russian networks and all of that. And we're on the list, and it's a very weirdly set up website. Right. And they said, this is a statement of facts, neither a list of enemies nor a kill list. It's like, give me a break. You know, I think we know what you'd all did to Dari Dugina after she was on the list. I think we all know what you did to Tatarsky after he was on the list. But yes, I'm skipping through the list to get to the part about us. Right. They got Code Pink on the list. How dare they do peace activism? Massachusetts Action for Peace, the Eisenhower Networks. I mean, it just RT, Gray Zone, and you know, wait until you get to us, right? Gray Zone's got a big section. Rage Against the War Machine has a big section. And in the Rage Against the War Machine section, right, they've got us. Right after Rage Against the War Machine, it says, one of the sponsors of the anti-war actions of Rage Against the War Machine is the Socialist Center for Political Innovation. It's headed by American journalist Caleb Maupin, included in the list of pro-Russian propagandists by the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation. Maupin calls his organization an education project and a community of young people. Well, we got plenty of not young people in CPI, you know, but hey, you know, whatever you want. I'm honored. CPI members call on the U.S. government to stop providing any assistance to Ukraine, repeating Russian theses, accusing Ukrainians of Nazism, civilian killings, abuse of the Orthodox Church, and calling 2014 Maidan a coup. At one of the Chicago conferences in 2022, CPI representatives walked on a stage with the flag of the United States, the Soviet Union, China, and the Donetsk People's Republic, holding a poster of a Z. CPI organized a similar performance in Austin, Texas. Bum, bum, bum. We are maniacal. I am so honored. I'm so honored to be on that list, right? But you know, I mean, it's you know, I mean, well, anyway, I could talk about that all night. You know, it's funny because there's a lot of like losers who want to make themselves feel better about the fact that they are just losers on the internet. That they always say, well, CPI doesn't do anything. CPI doesn't matter. It's like you list the things that we have done, from the World Youth Festival to confronting Sa Ing-wen on the streets of New York City and saying, get out of our country. We don't want war in our country, to, I mean, we get shit done. We do shit, you know. We really do shit. So there are people that want to silence us, and you know, the excuse that people who should know better make for going along with that is they go, oh, it doesn't matter. CPI doesn't matter. It's like, we clearly do. We clearly do. And when people say, well, CPI doesn't do anything except go into the woods, I think we do some more stuff than that. Just a bit, right? You know, between the rallies and our interactions with presidents, you know, I interviewed the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ibrahim Riazi. We attended the World Youth Festival. We got to speak with Putin. You know, we have receptions for Scott Ritter. We do some stuff. We do some stuff. Supporting Uhuru, we do some stuff. CPI, we do some stuff, right? And our enemies seem to know that. The imperialists seem to know that we do some stuff. But the way that people who claim to be anti-imperialist, but want to diss us and want to help the government persecute us, the way that they justify it is they say, oh, well, CPI doesn't matter. CPI doesn't matter. I think we do. We do matter. We do matter. And while I'm at it, I just want to throw this out there, right? I'm just throwing this out there, right? And just to get this on the record, right? Just because I feel like saying it, right? Go and watch the video of the event we just did. I mean, really, we didn't do it. We were just guests at LA Family Church. It was really Reverend Joshua and CARP, Collegiate Association of Research of Principles. They really did it. We just, you know, we attended. I gave a talk. You know, that event was so amazing. Right. And the fact that this very conservative church invited us there was so amazing. Right. And there are people who are angry with me. Oh, my God, Caleb, don't you know that's a conservative right wing church? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, really? Case you didn't notice, we emailed the socialist communist group that does Korea Solidarity, No Detal, and they were having a rally. The only thing No Detal has done in the last year is they had one rally when President Yoon of South Korea visited Joe Biden. They had one little rally. That's all they've done. But when that rally happened, we sent an email very politely saying that we would like to come to the rally. And we didn't get a response at first. So we thought, okay, whatever, you know, no response. But then, like the day before the rally, I got a very nasty, hateful response from the organization. That was really nasty. Basically telling us not to come to their rally because, you know, of some personal attacks on me. It was really nasty. So, you know, and then people turn around, oh, Caleb, why are you organizing with this conservative church? And I'm like, well, first of all, I will work with anyone to stop the wars. Second of all, the left seems more interested in stopping conservatives and Trump supporters than stopping World War III. And third, right, we tried to work with the socialist group that opposes the wars, that supports North Korea, and they dissed us. And it's weird because it's like the very same people that are mad that, you know, and we did have a blast. It was awesome. And it was good to see you there, Jorge. It was awesome to meet you. And I hope that you made the connections and awesome. But the very same people that are mad that I'm working with the people that I'm working with now, who I'm not ashamed to work with. I am proud to work with them. Reverend Joshua is my friend. Reverend Milhan is my friend. Reverend Takaya is my friend. They're all my friends. They're great people, amazing hosts. I am proud to work with them. I go to the church every Sunday here in New York, and I'm going out there again for the Peace Cup. And they're great people, and they're doing great work, right? And all the people that are complaining that I work with them are the exact same people that if No Detal had not told us not to come with them, and we had gone to No Detal's rally, they would have been calling up No Detal. Why are you harboring CPI? They're a cult. They're abusive. Blah 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 blah. Right. So the only thing that will satisfy these people, these wreckers, these cancelers, the only thing that will satisfy them is if I roll over and play dead. And I'm not going to do that because we're on the brink of World War III. Because there's some serious issues, because American imperialism and the global financial system is destroying the world. And so I'm not going to roll over and play dead. So these haters can, it's like, I can promise you, just like with Scott Ritter, right? before Scott Ritter, you know, when he was speaking at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, oh my God, we can't be there because Scott's there. And then Scott pulled out of the rally and they still attacked. Oh, and they still didn't go. And now, whenever the rally gets mentioned, they still bring up Scott, even though he didn't go, right? You will never please these people. You will never please these people. Let me just emphasize this. You will never please these people. The only way you can please these people is to stop being an anti-imperialist. Sure, if you stop supporting North Korea, if you just campaign for Joe Biden and you just march in the gay pride parade, they won't bother you. But aside from that, as long as you remain anti-imperialist, as long as you remain committed to genuine socialism and anti-imperialism, they will smear you, they will go after you. And that's how these people operate, right? And we need to approach it with that kind of thing. So if you ask me if I work with these people, damn right I do. And they're doing great work. And they're a lot nicer to me than any PSL member has ever been. They're a lot saner than any PSL member I've ever met. They are dedicated. They work very, very hard. They're out on the street, you know, out doing outreach and fundraising for their church all the time. They are committed to their principles. They are good folks. And that is my response. And that is the only answer to cancel culture. That is the only answer to it, right? And we need to respond to people who play ball with this cancel culture bullshit the same way we would respond to people who name names before the House Un-American Activities Committee. It's the same behavior, right? You know, it's the same, oh, I want to, you know, just don't. Because no matter what you do, it doesn't matter. These people are professional wreckers, right? So stop trying to please them, right? Because you cannot please them. Anyway, just wanted to get that out of my system. Got plenty more super chats to answer. All righty. All right. Why is Hermetic thought, Evola, etc., resurgent? Well, because that stuff is, you know, Julius Evola. I've got a few of his books here. I've read a lot of his stuff. I certainly don't agree with him. But Julius Evola, you know, he's the father of traditionalist thought, right? He wrote Revolt Against the Modern World, Man Among Ruins. And this stuff is right-wing anti-capitalism, right? It is conservatism, right? In Julius Evola's writing, you find the search for the organic state, right? The ideal way of doing things, right? It talks about the fall of man, about, you know, we have the Adam and Eve story in Christianity. The Greeks have their story, the Battle of the Titans and the origin, you know, and that there was a fall from grace, right? And we've been gradually getting further and further away from the ideal way of being, and that we need to get back to this ideal way of doing things. There's some ideal, perfect way of doing things. We need to get back to that. And it's critical of capitalism, and it's critical of globalism, et cetera. You know, and I think because the left, which generally it used to be communists, et cetera, that filled up those spaces. People were critical of capitalism. They were critical of the wars. They were critical of the economic system. They went to the left. But because the left has become crazy and has become the mainstream thing, like the insanity, you know, wokeness has become the new religion of Western society. People aren't interested in the left. And so they're interested in right-wing dissident ideas, right? And also, I think because of the economic crisis, because standard right-wing thought in America says capitalism is great because it's the best system ever. And if you're poor and you're lazy, you know, you need to just go get a job, you lazy bum or whatever. Well, in an economy like this, where people are really struggling to pay their bills, that doesn't fly no more, right? Just telling people, oh, it's all your fault. That's not going to work, right? So they're having to go backwards, right? If you look at the Great Depression, during the time of the Great Depression, there were many right-wing mass movements in the United States. The Silver Legion of America, led by William Dudley Pelley. You had the Black Legion. You know, you had there were a lot of right-wing movements that condemned capitalism. Father Coughlin, the radio priest, they used to call him. He was a right-wing Catholic priest who admired Adolf Hitler and was critical of capitalism in his sermons. He was very anti-communist, but he also condemned capitalism as being godless. And, you know, and so, you know, right now, because defending the status quo isn't going over, and because there are real problems in the economy, anti-establishment right-wing thought, traditionalism, right-wing anti-capitalism is having a revival because the left has forgotten about all that stuff, right? Generally, the left would be the standard place for that, but now the left, doesn't believe in that anymore. The left, is just the mainstream ideology. And so people are more interested in these right-wing anti-establishment ideas, right? And that's what I would put on it. And also, right, there's an element of, well, I don't know. There's a lot. This is something I could talk about for hours, but that's generally my analysis, is that because the left has dropped the ball, right-wing critiques of capitalism, right-wing critiques of modernity are more interesting to people. And because there is a widespread misconception that wokeism is the same as communism, right? And that's very widely believed, right? You listen to any conservative podcast, they start saying great things about how awful the woke people are. 100% agree. And then from there, and they say, and that's just the same as China. Wrong. And, it's just the same as North Korea. Wrong. It's just the same as Stalin. Wrong. And they start in with that, and it's like, oh lordy, and there they go, right? There they go. There we go. So there we go. And that's where we're at. Because people, think that all this stuff that they can't stand coming from our elites is communism, they're going to be interested in anti-establishment ideas that are not communist. So I do think that white nationalism, which is really like white supremacist, white separatist stuff, that was being boosted by the Democrats when Trump was president. And that's very clear. I mean, the amount of attention that Richard Spencer got, they've been having their National Policy Institute convention in DC for years, but it became like a national news event, just because they wanted to, that Hillary Clinton talked about the alt-right in her speeches, and that the Democrats were really trying to make white nationalism the talk of the town because, white nationalism is a toxic ideology, and it's never going to go anywhere because it's associated with all the evil, ugly things in American history associated with it. Lynching, Jim Crow, slavery, genocide. So because of that, right, there's no danger of some kind of anti-establishment right-wing movement based on that ever emerging because it's associated with some really, really ugly history. But it grosses, and the overwhelming majority of people in the United States are repulsed by that kind of thing. There is a small minority of people, a lot of whom are incels, like teenage incels that are mad at their parents and mad at society. But, aside from incels and prison gangs, very few people actually take that ideology seriously. But most people look at that ideology and are horrified. So it's the perfect scare puppet. And I really do believe that the Democrats were going out of their way to give as much attention as possible and boost Richard Spencer and that crowd as much as they possibly could. Because that, to somehow say Trump was a white nationalist, which Trump was not, right? But anyhow, I digress. All righty. Next question. Who were the Nazbols, and why do Western leftists use it as an insult? All right. So I guess first we'll start about why do Western leftists use it as an insult? Because they don't know what it is, right? They don't know what it is. Most, the memo has been sent out by the woke left that if you are an actual communist and you aren't woke, you must be a Nazi pretending to be a communist. And so they think, they hear Nazbol and they say, oh, it sounds kind of like Nazi. It's like Nazi Bolshevik or whatever. So that's what they think, right? I have never met an actual Nazbol, right? Ever. The only person I've ever met who called themselves a Nazbol was a Nazi named Eric Stryker. And he was not a Nazbol. He was a Nazi. And for a while he was trying to be, oh, I'm a Nazbol, but he's just a Nazi. He was a Charlottesville Nazi. But among very, very dumb teenagers on the internet who think they're communists, oh, well, if somebody's a communist and they're not pro-trans, like every communist government ever, they must be a Nazbol. Yeah. One time I met this guy and he was talking about like workers versus bosses and wars being waged for rich people. He didn't mention trans one time. He didn't mention hating Trump one time. He must have been a Nazbol, right? Basically, if you're a real communist, you're a Nazbol, right? It's just these dumb bread tube teenagers who don't know anything about communism. If they see actual communists, they go Nazbol, right? It's this like thing that's been planted in their head. The National Bolshevik Party was a political party in Russia that existed in the late 90s, and it was outlawed in Russia in 2007. And basically, what happened was you had the Russian Communist Party, led by Gennady Zyuganov. They lost the 1996 elections. Many people think the 1996 elections were rigged, but they just didn't have the oomph. It wasn't a matter of not having public support. A lot of people agreed with them. They just they weren't exciting enough. They weren't, they didn't have energy, right? People weren't willing to go out and fight for them. So Alexander Dugin and a punk rock novelist of Russian descent who lived in New York City for a long time, Edward Limonov, they formed a new political party called the National Bolshevik Party. And the idea was it would take elements of Russian nationalism as well as elements of Marxism. And they actually traced their heritage back to a faction in the German Communist Party. So I guess in the late 1920s, there was a big debate in Germany about how the Communist Party should approach people. And there was one faction in the German Communist Party that argued that since Germany had been stripped of its colonies after World War I, that Germany was an oppressed nation and it was a victim of imperialism. So communists should do what they would do in a colonized country and organize the German people on the basis of a national liberation struggle, right? Rather than a class struggle. Right now they lost, right? And the Comintern ultimately took the position that even though Germany had been stripped of its colonies after World War I, they were still a former imperialist country, and that they would organize a class struggle in Germany, and that's what ended up happening. But there was this small faction that argued, well, no, we should argue on the basis of German nationalism, that Germany is an oppressed country, etc. And so they broke away. And Alexander Dugin, when he and Edward Limonov founded the National Bolshevik Party, they argued that that was the correct position, right? That as after an imperialist country is defeated, you should organize on nationalistic lines in the country. That was their position. So they had the National Bolshevik Party. They were involved in a lot of protests and riots, etc. And then they were outlawed in 2007. And after they were outlawed, Alexander Dugin and Edward Limonov went their separate ways. Edward Limonov started his own party called The Other Russia. And Alexander Dugin started the Eurasian International Movement, which is like a think tank that promotes his theories of geopolitics and his traditionalist conservative views. So National Bolshevism is no longer a thing in Russia. Edward Limonov died, but before he died, he had, I think it's still around, it's called The Other Russia. It's just a political party that is more free-thinking or whatever. And Dugin is still around, and he has the Eurasian International Movement. But the National Bolshevik Party no longer exists. And it was just kind of one phase. And I think Edward Limonov and Alexander Dugin have both changed their political views. Alexander Dugin is now a conservative and a traditionalist, and he focuses on geopolitics. And I don't know what Edward Limonov believes, but neither of them are national Bolsheviks anymore. So the whole thing is just kind of over. It was like one stage in Russian politics, and it's over. So, I mean, and it has absolutely nothing to do with people that sound like communists, but they're actually Nazis. It has nothing to do with that whatsoever. Okay? So all these people talking about Nazbols on the internet, it's kind of over. I think that was kind of like 2 years ago. And I don't hear about this kind of stuff as much anymore. Right? But there you go. There you go. All right. Next question. Right. Next question. All right. Why exactly were Laos and Cambodia bombed? Well, the reason that Laos and Cambodia were bombed during the Vietnam War was because the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, that was fighting to reunify Vietnam, fighting against the U.S. puppet government in South Vietnam, were basing out of there. They were, they had weapons from North Vietnam were being transported through Cambodia and through Laos into South Vietnam. It was being used as an area through which the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, they would go there for like safe protection. They would transport weapons through there, and the USA didn't want them to be able to do that anymore. So it didn't want it to be a safe haven for them any longer. So, in 1970, in the spring of 1970, Richard Nixon announced that the U.S. war in Vietnam had expanded into Cambodia. And that was the cause of the upsurge of campus activism that ultimately resulted in the Kent State massacre. Kent State University, you had 4 students that were gunned down. Several days later, there were 2 students who were shot down at Jackson State University in Mississippi. And it was, it was because the war had expanded to Cambodia. But yeah, the USA bombed Cambodia and Laos. Laos was originally, the idea was it would be part of socialist Vietnam, but there was a feeling that the Lao people are of a different ethnicity than the Vietnamese. And so it's its own country. It's called the Lao People's Republic. And it still is the Lao People's Republic. So, yeah, and it's very friendly to China, very friendly to Russia. So, yeah, there you go. There you go. All righty. Next question. So the next thing is that we got a super chat from Crooklyn, and we thank you, Crooklyn, for the super chat. It's a sticker that says Hiya and Hiya back. And then the last super chat, unless anyone has any more super chats, by all means, more super chats are always appreciated. More is better. So if you got more super chats, send them our way. But the last super chat that we've got here is from, what is it, Heil? Is that what your name is? Heil? Lewis in Harul, not Heil. Lewis in Harul, he writes, he said, how do you explain Malthusianism? How should I explain Malthusianism to normies? Okay, well, first thing is that Malthusianism is that the idea is the problem in the world is that there's just too many people. That's what the basic explanation of what Malthusianism is. It's that they blame the problems in the world on overpopulation. If you hear anyone talking about overpopulation, that's Malthusianism. The idea there are too many people. It is the idea that we need to reduce the population, reduce consumption, make everyone poorer, and make less people, and that's the way to solve all our problems. That's what Malthusianism is. Now, the answer to Malthusianism, all right, if you want to debunk it, is to point out that human beings are the source of all wealth. It is human labor that creates all the wealth of the world. So having more people means more wealth. The idea that there's just too many people and that's causing the problem, no, because human beings create wealth. Human beings pave roads. Human beings build products. Human beings are the source of all wealth. Malthusianism is presumptive of the notion of non-productive consumers. The idea that there are people that just consume and don't do anything productive. And that's not necessarily true. Capitalism makes that true because of the irrationality of the market, because of the jobs being eliminated by technology, because of mass unemployment, etc. But there's no reason for that to be true, right? And the state could intervene to do something about it, right? If there's all kinds of unemployed people and, the economy can't hire them, the government could hire them to build roads or build high-speed railway or build the space program, right? And that there is no reason that human beings should be non-productive consumers. It is only the irrationality of the capitalist market that renders people as non-productive consumers. So the problem isn't people. The problem is capitalism and the state can very well turn people into productive consumers. Most of the post offices in this country were built during the time when there was a lot of unemployment in the United States, the Great Depression. So the government, headed by Roosevelt, hired the unemployed and it put them to work building post offices and building Key West Highway and building LaGuardia Airport. And that there is no reason, absolutely no reason, that there should be non-productive consumers in the economy. Human beings are the source of all wealth, and human labor power is only not utilized, and people are only reduced to being non-productive consumers by the irrationality of capitalism. In a centrally planned economy, the human labor of all people would be utilized. So people who think the problem is useless eaters, or as Malthus called them, non-productive consumers, that's not rational. That's not real, right? It only can exist in a capitalist free market, and even in a capitalist society, the state can take action to utilize the labor power of people. So, yes, human beings are the source of all wealth. More people means more wealth. So, yeah, that is the problem with Malthusianism, is that it views human beings as the problem, not irrational use of resources, not irrational use of the economy, right? And it's a way to make sure that the people in power can never lose their power. You're assuming that the people in power never have a government of action steps in to organize the economy to make life better. No, can't have that. So, all right, we got to make sure that all the rich people keep their wealth. We got to make sure that the government just sits back and lets people be unemployed. But we still have all these people that are non-productive consumers. What do we do? Oh, we'll just kill them all. Oh, we'll just, accelerate their death. So, and it's an anti-human ideology is really what it is. And it is basically the world is going to keep growing. And as the world keeps growing, the people that are at the top right now are going to lose their position. And it is the richest of the rich saying, how can we maintain our position indefinitely? Oh, we just have to stop human progress. We have to stop humanity from marching forward. We have to declare game over while we're at the top. We have to quit while we're ahead. It's basically all the big bankers, they want to quit while they're ahead. They want to stay at the top of the pyramid, so all the building of pyramids must stop. That's what Malthusianism is. And it is toxic, right? And I think we are living in the era where there is sinister Malthusian manipulation going on. Netflix is a Malthusian propaganda mouthpiece. 13 Reasons Why, which is encouraging teenagers to kill themselves. And people tell me, oh, Caleb, no, it's not. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. You know why? Because I work in media. You cannot report on a suicide. If someone kills themselves, you're not allowed to report on it. Why? Because every time they report on a suicide, the suicide rate goes up. So if I can't even mention on the news someone jumped off the Empire State Building today, because that is a danger to public health, how the hell do you make a 12-part mini-series all about the demented fantasy of a suicidal person? Right? And there's multiple seasons of this, right? This is the demented fantasy. A suicidal person thinks, I'll kill myself, and then people will understand how hard it is, and they'll finally understand how much pain I'm in. And that's not what happens. And that's a very sad, demented place that, that depressed people get into. But they made a 12-part, 2-season show that is simply the fantasy of a suicidal, depressed person being played out. It's just demented, right? That is not ethical in any conceivable way, right? And they did it, right? All the documentaries on Netflix, Planet of the Humans, all of them are promoting degrowth. All of them are promoting that there's too many people in the world, and they're all promoting the danger of a cult, the danger of a cult. Oh my God, there's a cult, right? If there's a group of people that are like organizing, it's probably a cult. There is a Netflix documentary, which I refuse to watch, but I have been sent screenshots of it so many times, called How to Become a Dictator. And they use me, an image of me multiple times in it as the image of angry mob. And it's an image of me protesting at the White House when I was protesting against the bombing of Syria. There was a woman there who was supporting, a couple anti-Assad people that were supporting the terrorists in Syria. And I shouted at them, "You are a terrorist murderer." And they used the clip of me shouting, "You are a terrorist murderer." They use it as like the image of the bad guy in their documentary several times. I kid you not. And it's called How to Become a Dictator, right? Right is the name of the documentary. And Netflix, you watch all the documentaries. It's all about, first of all, too many people in the world, suicide and depression and trauma. And then on top of that, stay away from cults, stay away from dictators, stay away from mass movements, right? These leaders around the world that are opposing our system and opposing our degrowth and lifting their countries from poverty, dictators. People that might want to build a mass movement to try and, change society and give people hope. Oh, it's a cult. Netflix is a Malthusian mind control operation, if there ever was one, right? And I mean, it's not a secret. I believe, what's her name from the United Nations, Susan Rice, who was part of the Obama administration. I mean, she's on the board of Netflix. It has no major competitors. It is very, very much, Netflix is very, very much a mind control operation. And I mean, it is. I mean, and there's not much we can do about it. But between the anti-North Korea, anti-China, anti-Russia documentaries, and it's a mind control operation, right? And it's Malthusian. It's all about human beings are a cancer on the planet. Evil human beings are using too many resources. And then, of course, it's very, very opposed to mass movements, very, very opposed to anti-imperialist governments. Netflix is a Malthusian mind control operation. And that's why one thing I tell people is you can make the decision. You're an adult, right? Maybe you're not, but I'm assuming that everyone watching this is an adult. And as an adult, you can decide what you watch, right? I can't tell you. I can't make you watch anything. But if you fill your mind up with Malthusian stuff, you are going to be miserable, right? I mean, so you have to make a decision about what it is that you consume, right? And if you consume material that is telling you humans are the problem, it's telling you that there's no hope, it's inoculating you against governments around the world that resist American imperialism, it's inoculating you against ever joining any kind of mass movement, well, I mean, you're going to be miserable. But you have the freedom of choice. It actually takes strength of character to say, no, I'm not going to watch this. I am going to listen to things that make me stronger as a person, right? I am going to make a decision about what I consume. And that's actually a level of individual choice, right? That's asserting your individual willpower, right? And that's the whole thing, is that freedom in their minds is just going with the flow. Let them drive, right? If you start to assert and say, no, I am going to listen to this. No, I am not going to let the algorithm tell me what to look at. I am going to seek out this content. I am going to read these kinds of books. I am going to listen to this kind of music. You assert control in your life and you say, I'm going to start exercising. Just went back to the gym a couple days ago. Feels great. Anyway, I am going to start exercising. I am going to, if you make a decision like that for yourself, they tell you that's authoritarianism. Freedom is just going along with letting them drive, letting your phone run your mind. That's what freedom is supposed to be. That's what freedom is supposed to be. And so I would like you to keep that in mind. I would like you to keep that in mind. But anyway, folks, I am going to put on the closing music now. It's been a great stream. I'll be back probably tomorrow night. And it's always good. We have a great community here. We're going to stand together. We're going to organize, and we're going to try our hardest to keep our community together amid all the hardships. I do want to put on a clip from Peter Coffin's great documentary about CPI before we end. So I'm just going to put on this clip called Country Joe. Well, actually, we'll put it on. So here we go.
I did start to get passionate. I told some stories from my own past and how I got involved in it and what this movement and socialism has really meant in my life, how grateful I am for the older communists who mentored me. I've made a lot of sacrifices to be where I am, but I've also gotten a lot of help and mentorship over the years, and I want to acknowledge that.
Really one of the most interesting nights of my life, which is when I was invited to speak at the hall where Malcolm X was assassinated in Harlem. There was a political prisoner's benefit. And it was a political prisoner's benefit. There were supporters of people from the Move 9 who were still locked up at that point. There were supporters of Mumia Abu Jamal and Jamil Al-Amin. And I walked into this auditorium and they had like a light where at the spot where Malcolm X had died, and I was on a panel and I was like the one white guy there. People were joking about the flyer and they're like, one of these speakers is a little bit different than all the other ones. But, you know, I was the only white guy there, and I looked out on that audience. I spoke for like 3 minutes. It was a very short presentation. But when I looked out on that crowd of several hundred people in there, I thought, I'm speaking to a group of veterans. I looked out on that crowd because these were black liberation fighters. These were Black Panthers. These were, you know, Black Liberation Army former members. These were black nationalists and others, and in walkers. And when people were speaking, they were shaking and having flashbacks, and there were a lot of tears in their eyes. And I thought, this is like a veterans gathering. This is like speaking at the VFW, right? And I mean, there's rooms like this in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. There's rooms like this in South Africa. There's rooms like this in People's Korea, you know, and this is a group of people who have made great sacrifices, and they're there to support their comrades who are still locked up, and they're in this for real, and they've seen it. And I looked out on that crowd and I thought, again, these are people who understand how serious it is, and this is how important all of this can be.
Communism will save America. China has created a system that's raising up its poorest people, its peasants, raised out of poverty. They're creating a system that gets to the base of the economy and recreates it so that the working class can rise. Unlike in this country, where homeless people sleep a block from the White House.
After the summit, we protested against the Museum of the Victims of Communism, which is nothing but spreading pro-imperialist lies, demonizing the history of the Soviet Union and China.
So trying to fight something that literally involves circumstantial change. Well, instead of fighting against people around the world, we should be fighting against those bankers who set up that situation. We should be building a coalition of people with different perspectives. We're going to stand up against big banks and corporations. That's what I think.
You're looking at Country Joe and the Fish. Little known fact, there was a band that played at Woodstock called Country Joe and the Fish Band. And the reason they have that name, according to every source that I can check, is because their parents were members of the Communist Party USA, and they picked the name for some pretty interesting reasons. Now, this guy was Country Joe because he was from Georgia, from the countryside. He grew up in a small village. He was the son of a bootmaker. And this guy was the Fish because one of his most well-known quotations, before he even started his organization, he just walked 300 miles through the countryside, talking to every person he could meet, asking them about the conditions of their life, engaging with them. He says, how should we judge whether or not a youth is a revolutionary? How can we tell? Well, there can only be one criteria, namely, whether or not he's willing to integrate himself with the broad masses of the workers and the peasants, and he does so in practice. The masses are the water, and the revolutionaries are the fish. Country Joe and the Fish.
The next stop is Vietnam.
We are educating, we're agitating, we're demonstrating, and we're normal people. That's the best part. Pretty normal.
Let's fix our government right here at home to provide for working people before we go 7,000 miles away to waste young, precious lives over something as dumb as anti-communism.
Afterwards, a few of us went to New York City to protest against Tsai Ing-wen, the Taiwan president.
All the polls show the American people don't want a new war. The American people are sick and tired of our money being wasted on bombs and weapons and destruction, provoking a war with China, provoking a war with Russia, while our dreams are derailing, people in the United States are suffering.
Tsai Ing-wen came to the United States to beg for more weapons and to demonize China. And the Center for Political Innovation, we were in the streets of New York City confronting the Taiwan president and her effort to spread war.
China is not our enemy. China is not our enemy. China is not our enemy. Get out of our country. Stop trying to sell war in our country. Stop trying to sell war in our country. We don't want a new war with China. We love America and we don't want a new war with China. China is not our enemy. Stop trying to sell war. Get out of our country. Stop trying to sell war.
You know, what we did with Sa Ing-wen, that went viral in Chinese media. Over 1 million shares. I was interviewed about it by Global Times. The Global Times, one of the main publications in China, made a point of highlighting the Center for Political Innovation, finding out about our work and why we do what we do. That was really, really great.
I'm a patriotic American. I love my country and I don't want World War III.
After all is said and done, Summit for Hypocrisy was a great success, and we can see that success. Look at all of the leftoids tailing us. They were calling us fringe, they were calling us cringe, and then a week later they all shut up, and then they started copying our organizing tactics. And I'm glad that they do. We know what the problem is, we are offering solutions.
In my eyes, CPI represents faith in humanity and the belief that there is an optimistic future to fight for, that your neighbor and the people around you aren't just stupid and in your way, but actually the hope for the future is in building relationships.
All right. So we got one last question here. How do you reconcile godless communism with TY Christian socialism? I don't know what TY is, but I want to know. I am conflicted big time. Well, I've done a couple workshops on that topic, and you will get a much longer answer in those workshops. And so I will link you both those workshops, but I will give you an answer now. All right, that's not a cop-out. I'll give you an answer now, but I think you'll be much more satisfied by watching the workshops that I've done. I've done a couple workshops on this very, very topic. So I will pull up the link to those workshops. But the main thing, right, and here's the right, here's one of the workshops I'll link. Right, we've done workshops at the various CPI retreats on this topic, and you'll be much more satisfied watching those workshops. But the main thing is this, right? At the time that Karl Marx came into prominence, religion was not a choice. In feudal society, in feudalism, religion was the state, right? The king was usually the head of the church and the government, and that the feudal hierarchy, where serfs were basically the property of the landlords, where people had no right to free speech, people had no right to to question authority, was justified in the name of God. And the church was a very bureaucratic, passionless institution that upheld the existing social order. And it upheld it in the name of spirituality. And the idea was you just obey and you follow the rules in this life and you'll be good for the next life. But if you question things, if you stand up against injustice, well, then you're going to be burned at the stake because you're going against the church. And so the revolutions to bring down feudalism have always had a very anti-religious character to them. And not as much in Britain and in the United States, but definitely in France. But even here in the United States, the founders of the United States were all religious skeptics. Thomas Paine was a very skeptical religious person. Thomas Jefferson was very much a critic of religion. And that there was a belief among, those fighting against the feudal order that religion was a tool of the masters of this world to oppress people. And that they wanted to reject any notion of spirituality. Because they saw spirituality as some kind of story that's been made up to oppress people. And so that's why I tell people about the ring that I wear. This is a ring that is commonly worn in Iran by Shia Muslim men. And when I heard the story of this ring, I thought it was perfect because the story is that the Temple of Mecca, before the rise of Islam, before the Prophet Muhammad, was a pagan temple where there were all kinds of idols. And the idols that were in that pagan temple, they were false, right? They were false idols. And so when the Muslim movement, when the followers of Muhammad took the temple, they smashed the idols, and they then kept the Prophet Muhammad kept a piece of one of the idols on his finger as a trophy of conquering that temple for the one true God. And the reason that I found that story to be so inspiring is because I read a book called Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History by Thomas Carlyle, who was a Scottish Protestant Christian writer. And in his book, he talks about why is it that all the great prophets of the world, why is it that they always destroyed idols? Right? Now, we wonder, were the people of the ancient world stupid, that they thought they could get a piece of wood and carve it and it would be God, that they could get a piece of stone and they would carve it and that would be God? No. When the idols were originally put up, they stood for principles. They represented higher truths. They were symbols that reminded people of God. But after generations passed, the idols just became routine. And they lost their meaning and their value. And they became part of the apparatus of society to oppress people. And so the prophet Jeremiah, the prophet Moses, the prophet Abraham comes and smashes the idol. Not because he's against God, but because he wants to connect people with the true God. And in order to connect people with the true God, you've got to smash the idol. And so communism, when it first emerged, it was an idol smashing movement because religion, the Catholic Church, feudalism in medieval Europe, it had become an idol. And so the communist movement emerged. They weren't revolting against God. They were revolting against corrupt bureaucratic institutions that spoke in God's name. And I believe God was using them to clear out what was there before so that other folks could come along and connect with the one true God. That's what I believe. And that the anti-religious energy, it was a reaction to the way religion was in feudal society. And that it was useful to God because it cleared out the idols. And it laid the basis for humans to really connect with God by clearing out a lot of the idols that were there. And that communism is an overcorrection. In feudal society, everything is spiritual. Right? The idea is you're naturally born into your place. There's some people that are naturally kings. There's some people that are naturally peasants. Everyone's born into their place, and it's all justified in the name of religion. And communism, right? Marxism, Leninism says everything is material. No. All that exists is matter. All thought is simply a reflection of matter, right? The material world is all that exists. Thoughts and feelings are just a reflection of that material world. No. But it makes sense. If you're overthrowing an order that says everything is spiritual, you'd replace it with an order that says everything is material. Well, the world, there is a material world and there is a spirit world. Right? And both exist. But communism was an overcorrection. Right? Communism emerged really out of the struggle to bring down feudalism. What happened was you had the French Revolution. That's where the word left comes from, because after they overthrew feudalism in France, they had a national assembly, and the people that were still loyal to the king sat on the right, and the more radical folks sat on the left, and that's where left and right come from. And after feudalism was overthrown in France, there was still injustice everywhere. And so communism emerged from the left Hegelians, and it was the people that came out of the French Revolution, and they said the French Revolution didn't go far enough because it didn't create a just and fair society. And, Karl Marx was one of the left Hegelians, and he saw his movement as a continuation of the French Revolution. And he viewed religion as an oppressive idea, that was designed to keep people in their place. And he saw the communist revolution as being even more revolutionary than the French Revolution. So thus being ultra scientific and thus being ultra anti-religious. However, what we have now seen is that the ideals of the bourgeois revolution to bring down feudalism, the ideals of the French Revolution, the left, the radical wing of the French Revolution, have become the ruling ideology of the West. Radical individualism, breaking down any sense of collectivism. That ideology of the individual above all else, that is the dominant ideology in the West. You have economic liberalism, which is free market capitalism. You're on your own, right? You're on your own, you against the world. Society doesn't owe you anything. You don't owe anything to society. Every man for himself. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's economic liberalism. And then you have social liberalism. You don't have any obligation to your family. You don't have any obligation to your country. You can do whatever you want to do, and you have no obligation to society. There's no traditional gender roles. There's none of that. You are just an individual. And social liberalism is what the left emphasizes. Economic liberalism is what the right emphasizes. But the Western world is ruled by individualism, and it's ruled by the liberal ideology that puts the individual above all else. Human beings are collective in nature. And communism is a collectivist movement, right? It's communism, right? It's the same root of the word as community. And what we have learned is that the radical individualism and the aesthetic of the left and communism as an economic social system don't go together. And the West has really adopted the radical individualism of the left. That's what wokeism is. It's called, it's postmodernism, it's deconstructionism. It is the desire to destroy, it is the desire to oppose conformity. Wokeism is leftism without communism. And what we're seeing around the world, in China, in Russia, in North Korea, in Cuba, in Nicaragua, is we're seeing the very beginnings of communism without leftism. Nicaragua is a communist government. Daniel Ortega is the president. It's the Sandinistas. But the slogan everywhere in Nicaragua is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. Nicaragua has some of the strictest anti-abortion laws of any country in the world. Very religious country, very socially conservative country. But it's got a Marxist socialist economic system. Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. The leader of the Russian Communist Party, Gennady Zyuganov, is an Orthodox Christian. And, you can see many examples of that. Right now in China, there's a huge revival of interest in Mao, but there's also a huge revival of interest in Confucius. Mao and Confucius hated each other. Confucius was the father of traditionalism and the traditional Chinese culture. Mao was this communist revolutionary who tried to destroy that, but Mao built China into a modern socialist country. And Confucius laid the basis for China's traditional culture that's very collective and all of that. And now in China, Mao and Confucius walk hand in hand as part of China's unique non-Western identity. Confucius is a conservative, Mao is a radical leftist, but both of them are rejecting Western liberalism. Both of them rejected the notion of individualism above all else. Mao emphasized economic illiberalism, socialism. Confucius emphasized social illiberalism, filial piety, loyalty to your family. But both Mao and Confucius are saying individualism above all else, wrong. And that is what China is celebrating. We're living in a very strange period. And I have broken with leftism. I am not a leftist because I don't agree with the destructive aesthetic. But I believe in socialism and I believe in communism, right? Because I believe we need an economy that's organized to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few. And ultimately, I believe that faith in God and service to a higher power and living for the sake of others is an aspect of building such a society. And I also believe that you cannot build God's kingdom on earth without God. And that the anti-religious edge of communism is what gave birth to the Khrushchev revelations. It's what gave birth to the ultimate destruction of the communist world, right? Because the left aesthetic leads to atomization. It leads to society breaking down. It leads to radical individualism. And that if you listen to the new atheist movement, Bill Maher, Christopher Hitchens, people like that, they see communism as a religion. And they see communism as a form of collectivism that they are opposed to. And they make that point very blatantly. So that's some of what I talk about. But ultimately, I think that communist materialism and the dialectical materialist philosophy was a reaction to what existed in feudalism. And it was an overcorrection. It was an overreaction. But it was necessary to clear out the idols, to set the stage for people to connect to the one true God. That's what I believe. And I've got multiple lectures on this YouTube channel about that topic. And on that note, I'm going to have to end things, but I do appreciate it. I'm glad people are watching, and I'm going to put on the closing music. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.